Good evening. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate that you are attending tonight or listening on television. I think this is a significant issue in Bitterford's history, and it's important that we all are informed and ask good questions and get as much information as we possibly can. Tonight, you're going to hear a presentation by city staff in terms of the questions that were raised at last week's public hearing, as well as to address some of the misinformation and misunderstanding that has been visibly evident inside the community. Tonight's not a public hearing per se, it's a council workshop. So we look at it as an informational session so that all of us can get on the same page, because there are councilors that have questions as well as the general public. So the format's going to be like this. First, you'll hear a presentation from various members of city staff, again, addressing the questions that were raised and giving further information and clarifying some of the issues. There'll be a period of time where the council can ask some questions regarding the input or anything else that they might have. Even though this is not a public hearing, I'm going to allow the audience to ask questions, but questions only. You will not be able to say you're for or against, but if you have a specific question, that will be in order. The only issue that you will not be allowed to discuss are the employee issues, because Maine Energy at this time is meeting individually on a case-by-case basis with members of their staff and telling them of the agreement, telling them about what the future holds, and getting into some details, which is not public at this time, and we do not feel comfortable going into that realm. So all conversation, all questions regarding employees is off limits for tonight. What is on target is the contracts themselves, and I want to make sure everybody understands we're talking about 3 contracts: the purchase and sale, the waste contract, as well as the recycling contract. I should also point out that maybe not everyone is aware in the audience, but we are live tonight. We did a switch with the planning board. They'll be tape delayed, and we're going live. A couple of things just from my standpoint, and some of the things that I want you to keep in mind as you get this information. First, many people are really concerned about tax increases, and I fully understand that. In fact, I hope you clearly recognize that my personal commentary over the last few months has been a concern for that, and even in terms of extending a veto. I think everybody in this council is extremely concerned about that. So when you look at these numbers, be aware that much of the information that's floating out there in terms of tax increases is completely wrong. For example, if you look at the impact on a $200,000 home over the life of the contract, for 20 years, the cumulative amount would be $1,664 and some change, which is roughly $79 and some change per year. That is if there's no development. Okay, so you're talking a possible increase of approximately $79 for a $200,000 home. Now, there's also a catch. If we fail to come up with a contract, there are still going to be some increases in waste handling. Those aren't going to go away. And you'll see the rationale for it, but the rationale that the city is projecting that if there is no contract, the cost to the taxpayer in increases just because of waste handling is going to be $1,388 or $66 per year. So with the contract and the elimination of Maine Energy, we're talking $79 per year. Without a contract, automatically you're looking at $66 a year. And again, you'll see the average, but just listen to the explanation as it's given. My view, of course, and I think the view of many up here, is that this adventure, or this venture, I suppose, is going to trigger a lot of redevelopment. Developers have already told the city that if Maine Energy leaves, they are willing to invest. We had a developer here at the public hearing that said exactly that. And others have indicated the same thing. So again, when you're looking at some of these numbers, think about the possible impact to alleviate the mill rate. I think it's really important that when we look at this whole picture, we're not looking at a cost, or at least I'm not. I don't see this as a cost per se, but as an investment. Because somewhere down the road, could be a year, 2 years, or whatever it happens to be, the idea is through either the sale of the land or the negotiation of some sort of plan for the land or the redevelopment of the mills of the downtown, the money will be recouped. Okay, so the numbers themselves that you're seeing are void of that type of scenario. Last thing. Casella has been clear that they're closing their doors. They no longer want to be in the incineration business. If we don't come up with a contract ourselves, they're going to sell to somebody else. I mean, that's just the way business is done, and I don't blame them. They're not going to take a loss. They're not going to just walk up and leave a building there and say, you can have it. That's not going to happen. That's not the real world. Our goal for the last 6 months as a group, and I have to applaud the team, and the city staff has been unbelievable in this whole journey. But you have to really think about what this holds for the future and how we want to control our own destiny, how we want to control the 8.5 acres, how we want to control what takes place and not be captured or caught up in an entangling web that's been going on for the last 25 years. I really think this is a benchmark moment for the city of Biddeford, and I hope that this information helps you to understand how this group up here came to those conclusions. And I know this is controversial. And I know for the employees it has to be emotional because, you know, you don't know what the future holds. But I do believe, however, that the city really has to take charge of its destiny. Nobody else is going to do it for us. We have to take charge ourselves. And again, I don't see this as a cost at all. I see it as a great chance for the city of Biddeford to actually control its own future. That being said, I'm going to turn it over to staff to begin this presentation. The City Attorney, Keith Jakes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Is that better? Great. I'm going to try to be brief. I'm going to walk through the purchase and sale agreement, the waste handling agreement, and the recycling collection and disposal agreement for the members of the public and also members of the council, just to sort of walk through the process. I'm going to be brief and sort of touch upon points in large part because the agreements have been available to the council for a couple of weeks now. They've been posted on the website for a couple of weeks, as have the bullets regarding the agreements. And so I don't want to take the time for people who've had an opportunity to look at it to just reiterate what they've already read. If you haven't had an opportunity to read, I really urge you to go onto the website and take a look at it. All three agreements are posted in full. Certainly, I think they're relatively straightforward, although I'll be the first to admit that lawyers and relatively straightforward tend not to go hand in hand. So I'll walk through it, and then we'll also have an opportunity for council to ask questions regarding any terms regarding the contracts, and then also the public to the extent you have any questions. First off, as I'm sure most people, if not everyone's aware of, basically, the purchase and sale agreement provides that on or before November 15th of this year, Biddeford would purchase Maine Energy for the purchase price of $6,650,000. That amount would be payable over 20 years to Maine Energy without interest. The first payment would be due 1 year after title was conveyed to the city on or before November 15, 2013, assuming a November 15, 2012 closing. So the first payment would be for $150,000. The second payment due 2 years after the closing would be $200,000. And then from November 15th and for the next 18 years, the payment would be $350,000 annually, which adds up to $6,650,000. At any point during the 20-year period, the city would have the option to prepay the entire purchase price or a portion of the purchase price without any penalty. And at the time of purchase, Maine Energy would assign, at the time of purchase, that's November 15th, 2012, assuming the contemplated closing would go forward as scheduled, Maine Energy would assign the leases that it currently has on the cellular contracts on its stack to the City of Biddeford. So starting on November 15th, 2012, lease payments on those contracts would be payable to the city. Currently, those leases generate about $145,000 annually. And they are termed out for several years out there, although obviously the amount that would be paid has escalated, so that payment would go up. But in fairness, there are rights of termination if the cell providers decided to do that somewhere down the road. But right now, we're calculating $145,000 of revenue from those cell leases based upon the existing leases. All of those leases have CPI escalators. There are a number of contingencies that must be satisfied before the closing would go forward. And I want to touch upon those because they've been the subject of some commentary. And I want to assure the public that we're not setting ourselves up to buy a pig in a poke here on Franklin Street. One of the things that the city would do prior to going forward with this deal is conduct Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental reviews on the property. The city has 90 days to complete those reviews, which we understand from contractors that we've spoken to, and Brian's confirmed that gives us more than sufficient opportunity to conduct both Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental reviews. If for whatever reason we're unhappy, the city's unhappy with what those Phase 1 or Phase 2 environmental reviews reveal, we have the absolute right to back out of the contract at our sole option. The second, one of the other contingencies is, I'm sure all of you have heard that one of the ways the city's contemplating partially funding the purchase is through TIF revenue funds of $150,000 or approximately $150,000 per year. The city's obligations to go forward and purchase the property are contingent upon the city acquiring the necessary amendments to its TIF so that, in fact, we can be assured that we have the means to be able to go into the TIF and get the $150,000 per year. Again, if for whatever reason we're not able to achieve the amendments through the state, we have the absolute right to back out of the contract at our sole discretion. A couple of other areas where we contingencies, obviously, is surveys of the property, title inspections of the property, the typical type things that a buyer would do when purchasing a property. And if for some reason, again, at any point the city's unhappy, within 90 days of the surveys, the city's got the right to withdraw from the contract. And also, throughout the process, if there become title issues that gives the city concern regarding the title that it's getting to the property, it would have the right to withdraw from the contract. There are some contingencies on the part of Maine Energy's obligations to go forward on the deal, one of which has been satisfied for all intents and purposes, and that's the ability for Maine Energy to construct a transfer station in Westbrook, Maine. And our understanding, and based upon the information that we've learned, is that Westbrook is agreeable to them constructing that facility. The second contingency is that Maine Energy obtain the right or the ability to accept our waste at the Juniper Ridge facility in Old Town. And early in this deal, you may have heard that the contingency was that Maine Energy actually get title to that landfill. That's no longer the case. Maine Energy simply wants some assurances that it has the ability to take our waste and the waste of the 13 communities, the other York County communities that currently are delivering to Waste Energy, to Maine Energy, to the Juniper Ridge facility. And then finally, the contract or the ability to purchase is contingent upon the city and Maine Energy entering into acceptable waste handling agreement and an acceptable recycling, collection, and disposal agreement, which I'll touch upon in just a couple of minutes. There's been a lot of discussion with respect to the cell, the main stack, and the fact that it is staying up. And What's important to recognize is that the assignment of the cell contracts to the city is going to generate $150,000 a year to the city in lease revenue for those cell towers, which is a significant part of the total obligation to Maine Energy. In fact, the first 2 years we'll be collecting cell revenue on that stack, and that together with the TIF payment would actually exceed the amount of money that's due Maine Energy in the year 1 and year 2 payments. The inclination, or from a city's perspective, obviously, it's my understanding that the city will be looking for means to potentially relocate that tower either to a development that occurs on the site going forward, relocate the cell antennas to a development that goes on the site, or to adjacent building and other development properties. The long and short of it is it's simply, and obviously once that happened, the stack would come down. But from a practical perspective, until the city's assigned these contracts as a right to work with these providers, it would be premature to talk about how long that's going to take, but certainly I think it's a priority on the part of the city to try to relocate these towers while maintaining the revenue. Closing on November 15th of 2012, Maine Energy then has the opportunity to continue to operate on the facility for 6 months as it transitions to the Westbrook facility. And then within 12 months, the facility, except for the main stack, has to be demolished. Maine Energy's obligations as part of the demolition is to bring the facility down to grade, also to remove 3 underground tanks that are located on the property, and to restore the property to grade level. When they discontinue operations, and also stepping back, is during the time period that they're generating revenue at that site through the operations, they're obligated to continue to pay the same amount of taxes that or an amount equal to the amount of taxes that they've paid to the city, even though the property at that point will have been conveyed to the city. Prior to conveying the stack to the city, Maine Energy has certain obligations to stabilize the stack, and Brian will talk about that a little bit more. But before we take conveyance of the stack, Maine Energy is obligated to clean and stabilize the stack, to remove the top 10 feet of the stack, and then also to cap the stack to prevent any elements from entering into the stack. Obviously, during this time period, the city will be monitoring Maine Energy. All the licenses, operating licenses, remain in effect. Their obligations from an environmental standpoint remain in effect. The city will continue to have the ability to monitor Maine Energy as it's currently monitoring them. And they have an obligation to continue to operate consistent with city ordinances and consistent with the state licenses that it holds. I think that in a nutshell is also with respect to decommissioning the stack, that would be at Maine Energy's expense. So that's sort of a bullet point of what purchase and sale agreement provides for. And what I'd like to do, unless the council wants to handle it differently, is go on into the waste handling agreement, touch upon those points, and then also at that point touch upon the recycling agreement. And then if there are questions, we can ask them at that time. Council, yes. That would be the will of the mayor and the council.
If you have a particular question, if you have something, go ahead.
Can't hear you. All right. Can you hear me now? Yes. I asked if we could ask questions to this specific agreement before we move on to the next.
I would allow that. Go ahead.
Okay. When phase 1 and phase 2 of the environmental review is done, at whose decision will it be if we want to back out of the deal?
I would assume that would be the council. Would have to be the I would have to be the council.
Council? Okay,
yes.
Thank you. And you discussed the relocation of the cell towers. At whose cost will that be?
Go ahead. That would depend upon the nature of the relocation. Obviously, if we have an agreement with the cell providers to provide the location to them, and so it would either be at either mutual cost, to the extent that you negotiate an extension as part of that, at the city's cost potentially, or at the cost of a developer. There are a number of different scenarios that we could envision with respect to moving these antennas somewhere down the road, and I think all of them are in play, but I don't think we have any particular direction that we've committed to at this stage.
So worst case scenario, what would it cost the city?
We don't know that at this stage of the game.
The catch to remember is that they do have contracts to be on that stack, and so there would have to be some sort of mutual agreement in terms of moving and cost sharing, and also even in terms of, as Keith indicated, in terms of looking for some developers to pick up or share some of the revenue, whatever. So those are deals that would be made later on. But the bottom line is we have contractual, or we will assume contractual obligations with those cell companies.
Thank you.
Councilor Ajay?
Just want to ask just a couple of questions. We look at the contract of the cell towers is $150,000. For how many years do we assume that this is going to happen?
Currently, the cell tower contracts on the property, I think the longest contract goes out to 2030 on the extensions. The shortest contract goes out to 2013. There currently are six providers on that stack, so to say when would they terminate if they were to terminate, most of them have the ability to terminate at this stage of the game because they're in option terms within certain notice to the city, anywhere from, to Maine Energy, within 60 to 90 days on average.
So in other words, we could lose these contracts within a 90-day period. So again, the assumption is that, this $150,000 could go away in very little time, correct?
It could, or it could be around 50 years from now.
Exactly. It could be either way.
That's correct.
Correct. Okay. I just want to make sure that, I have that right in my mind, in the sense of as I gather my note-taking and trying to find out whether or not I want this to go forward. The city, you talk about the cleaning and the stabilizing, all right? And I have a problem with the stack, but I'm going to make my question. It's going to be cleaned and stabilized, but if that stack stays up for 50 years, what guarantee do we have as it's coming down that it won't materialize into something else? Do we have anything that would go back to the owners of this at this point? Or is it that they clean it and they stabilize it and they walk away from it and that's it?
That's correct. We would be doing
so
a fit.
we take the responsibility of taking down that stack at some point in time once this deal is written, correct?
That is our responsibility, correct.
All right. I want to make sure, in the sense that, there's no guarantee here on that stack when it comes down that it may give out some air emissions or it may do some harm to our environment.
Yeah, if I may speak on that, and I'm not an environmental scientist, and Brian will speak on that, but preliminarily, the likelihood of that causing an issue is remote, and it also would be subject to the phase 1 and phase 2 environmental reviews. And to the extent that there were concerns, we'd identify that prior to closing.
Okay.
Brian, do you want to inject on that?
Yeah, I would agree with Keith's assessment that the purpose of the phase 1 and phase 2 assessments is for the city to have a clear understanding of what types of risks are associated with the site, and whether or not those risks, to the extent they exist, are palatable to the city, and we have the ability to back out of the contracts if we don't feel that's the case. So,
Rock, you want to continue?
Yes, Brian, in the sense that the stack is being taken down, all right, we're taking down 10 feet, correct? We're capping it?
Yeah, as part of the contract, the decommissioning would involve basically an inspection, the typical cleaning that would occur on the stack, and the reason that you do that is you have acid gases in there. If you don't neutralize those, that it could erode the stack prematurely. That stack also, the construction of it, it actually has what's called an annular space. There's a stack inside of a stack, so it needs to be able to breathe so you don't get condensation and further cause, corrosion and erosion and so forth in the stack. So as part of the assessment, we've actually gotten prices, and I'll go through this when we get to the actual discussion on the contract in a little more detail, but basically, we understand what the inspection costs are. We've put a factor in there for normal maintenance for the stack. And once the top 10 feet is removed, and then a weather stack is put on, a weather cap is put on the stack, for all intents and purposes, there's no reason to believe that stack wouldn't remain for 50 years, as long as you inspect it and do routine maintenance on the stack. When it comes time to pull the stack down, there'd be no reason that new contamination would be created while it's been sitting there. We do the assessment ahead. We know what the potential risks are and whether those are palatable to us at that time. But there's no reason to suspect that anything new would pop up between the time that we decommissioned the stack and we decided to actually dismantle it.
Can I ask, is the material, and I take this from conversation with one of my constituents that have called me, and saying that what's inside of the stack is very porous. Is it?
Well, what's in the stack is basically, you can see it from the ground, it's a concrete housing basically around a brick structure of the stack. So the brick, the mastic and so forth, that clearly is all porous material. And again, as part of the phase 1 assessment is analysis in terms of whether or not there's any significant risk posed by that material.
So the possibility is still there that this porous material could do something to our environment. I mean, it may be very negligent, but it could be there.
Well, I certainly can't tell you that there would be absolutely no contamination and there'd be no dust generated from the taking down the stack. What I can tell you is that the phase 1 and phase 2 are designed to quantify what the potential risks are, so that we can make an informed decision on whether or not we want to move forward with the contracts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Councilor
Thank
Borowski?
Yes. To follow up on Rock's question about the stack, the 90 days that we have to do the environmental review, is that after the sale or after the plant stops operating? After we sign or after the plant stops operating?
90-day review would be after the execution of the purchase and sale agreement.
Okay, so the stack is still going to be in operation for 6 months after we sign that. How is an environmental review going to be done on that? It won't have been cleaned yet, correct?
That's correct. The stack wouldn't be cleaned until they ended operation, which if we went through the timeline that Keith laid out, or Mr. Jakes laid out, November would be the actual signing of the formal agreement, and then it'd be 6 months operation before they actually curtailed operations. Curtailed operations would be roughly May if we did it in November. So we basically do our upfront analysis, an upfront evaluation in terms of the potential risks of the facility. The facility is only permitted to handle certain wastes. There's no reason to believe that waste would be any different from the day we did our analysis to the day they closed the facility and actually decommission it. So our analysis, our evaluation is done up front so that we know basically right now they're in operation. We would understand what the potential risks are for any contamination that might be in that stack and be able to make an informed decision. I wouldn't suspect that the potential for something new to show up in the stack between the time that we actually do our analysis and the time the facility is closed and they decommission it.
And the process that they will take to clean it is what?
It basically, when you decommission a stack like that, it basically wash down the inside of it, neutralize it, and basically collect all that material, neutralize it, and then once it's dried out, it's basically stabilized.
With a sandblaster?
No, you wouldn't necessarily have to sandblast the inside of it. No.
Thank you.
No.
Councilor Raines?
Brian, there have been questions about potential costs for the city when the stack comes down, concerns about the creation of a Superfund site. Could you explain how the funding of the removal of the stack will go forward?
Well, let me do that in two parts, if I may, from a Superfund standpoint.
Sorry to throw that in there.
Well, it's a good point, though, because that question was raised. Again, the Phase 1 and Phase 2 site assessments, there's actually ASTM standards that define what the minimum is for those assessments, and it's very clear. Any environmental transaction, any transaction of a commercial nature, most banks are requiring at least a Phase 1. So this is nothing new in terms of what you should do. We know what the site, the purpose of the site was. We know what the general materials that the site handled, and we have a good understanding of what potentially might be there for potential contamination. So we would structure the Phase 1 and Phase 2 around those to make sure that we captured what we're looking for. So again, we're able to make an informed decision on that. In terms of actually taking the stack down, from a pricing perspective, there are a number of different options. I mean, the city can allocate a certain amount of money per year to be able to do that. You can basically, once you get to the end of the useful life of the stack, say it comes down prematurely, the assumption would be that if you're taking the stack down, it's because you already have the gap that was left that we needed to fill with property taxes and so forth. That development has already occurred. So if you're at that stage, you can wait an additional year and use that additional tax money to do the removals and so forth. There are many different financial options involved, and that's something that the city would have to determine in terms of how you're actually going to finance that portion of it in terms of the actual cost. Yeah.
But as I understand it, this was foreseen by the negotiating team, and that was part of the negotiation, getting cost allotment as part of the deal, forgiveness of the last payment to more or less cover the cost of...
Yeah, I misunderstood the question there. Probably Keith would be able to answer that more directly then. Yeah.
As the council may aware, prior to the last go-around with Maine Energy, the purchase price had been reduced to $7 million. We conducted some estimates with respect to what the cost would be of taking the stack down, and then went back to Maine Energy and asked that the purchase price be reduced to give the city credit for it undertaking the cost of demolishing the stack, and that's where we went from $7 million to $6,650,000.
And I believe the scenario that you suggested to some of us was that there are companies that do this, that we wouldn't be sending Public Works over there. There are companies that do this.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
All right, and you have an idea about, you have estimates about what the cost would be, and then you've imputed some inflation factors out, and you have some idea about what the cost will ultimately be.
Yes, it ranged anywhere from $50,000 to $450,000. The $50,000 option was the thing that you would see on the nightly news, where they have this big stack and they implode it and it falls right in place. The more likely scenario, because of what we have around there, would be the actual dismantling of the stack, in which they would implode the center portion and then take off the concrete portions in units and dispose of the material after that. Yeah.
And one more, if I might.
Sure.
To this question about potential environmental contamination in Biddeford resulting from the demolition of the stack, some of us have been somewhat concerned about what comes out of the stack routinely through the 25-year operation of the facility. In your estimation, would any fugitive emissions from the demolition of the stack be worse than what's been emitted over 25 years in this town?
I would say no. There certainly would be fewer emissions, but let's just say that there were low-level heavy metals, and there's potential silica. Just if you demolish anything that has concrete in it, you're going to generate concrete dust, and that poses its own risk. But that risk would be no different than if you demolish the concrete building. The concrete, I refer to it as a Cronkite building, which is just across the railroad tracks. I mean, that's mainly concrete. So the demolition of concrete is going to generate dust. It won't be any different than any other demolition of a concrete building. There would be possibly an incremental increase based on heavy metals or whatever that might, lead and so forth, that might be in the brick. But again, the construction of brick historically contained those types of materials anyway. So we should have a good understanding of what potentially is in those before we make this decision to move forward. Yeah.
Well, just as a coda to that, I remember a few years ago that the city council delegated the fire department to burn the Birch Street School, which was covered with lead paint and so forth, and loosed all kinds of stuff on the town, and people turned out to watch it. Anyway, that's my own jaundiced perspective. Thank you.
Council Swanton?
On page 7 of the contract, it says after we buy it, we have no recourse. The buyer upon closing shall deem and have to waive, relinquish and release seller from all responsibility. So if after 2 years we tear the thing down, somebody goes to build something else there and discovers a Superfund site, how do we go back to Casella?
First off, is what you need to understand is that one of the things that we're undertaking as part of this is both the Phase 1 and the Phase 2 environmental studies.
And what if we miss it?
If we miss it, we would not have recourse against Casella.
Okay.
That's why we're doing the Phase 1 and Phase 2, and that's why we're getting, in effect, the protection of the brownfield assessments on that property. Brian, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I was going to talk about it more in detail, but I'll just hit upon it now. Part of the process that we would go through in terms of the review of the Phase 1 and Phase 2 as part of the state's brownfields program, sort of extension of the brownfields program, is what's called VRAP, voluntary Voluntary Remedial Action Plan. There we go. Sorry, brain cramp there. And basically what we would do is we get the information and we would apply to the DEP, no different than what we did with Diamond Match and what we did with the CMP property. Basically, you identify what the contaminants are on the site, and the goal is redevelopment, and that's what you're. Anyone in the chain of title potentially has liability. So the VRAP program actually identifies, okay, what are the contaminants, what are the protections you need to put in place based on those contaminants, and if you do that, you and the other people in your chain of title are protected, and would not be, the DEP would not come back on us or the other title owners for any new contamination that was not identified prior to. So that's one of the protections that we would require. From our standpoint, we would obtain that.
Yeah. Councilor Bedorowski?
Yes, one more question, Brian. You mentioned that the staff would require routine maintenance and inspection throughout its life. What department will be responsible for that in the city?
That's actually, that would be a contract service, and that's in the spreadsheet there. Basically, there are companies that come in and do the structural analysis, and then we budgeted roughly, I think it was roughly $10,000 a year for the routine maintenance on the stack. And speaking to a company that does the inspections and the maintenance, they said that that was more than enough based on just routine activities that they would see on a decommissioned stack.
And that's in addition to the purchase and sale?
Yeah, that's accounted for in the spreadsheet, yes. It's the purchase and sale obviously is the financial component paying back Maine Energy for their $6.65 million. There are other impacts that the city would incur, obviously, and those are included.
Which department will be responsible for maintaining that?
Again, it's a contract service.
But it's going to be under, and when we budget, what department will it be under?
Oh, I'm assuming that it would probably fall under me to make sure that was scheduled and maintained. Yeah.
So all of this funding that we're discussing, from the purchase and sale to the inspection to the removal of the stack, is all going to be contingent as well on next year's budget passing. Just a point of interest.
Thank you. Any other questions? We're going to stay with the council and then go through the contracts and go into the audience. So I just want to allow, if there's no other questions at this point, I'll go to the next contract. Because again, as I indicated, there were 3 different contracts. By the way, I have suggested to my cousin Guy with his new hip that he could probably be in charge of checking out that stack. Yeah, you know,
doing the work.
He's so much more mobile. Go ahead, Keith, if you want to do the...
Yeah, the next agreement that's currently before the council is the waste handling agreement. As people may know, the current waste handling agreement with Maine Energy expired on June 30 of this year. That's being continued pending these discussions. But the new waste handling agreement with Maine Energy would provide for an initial tip-in fee of $55 per ton that would be adjusted annually by the Consumer Price Index. The term is a 10-year term. The city, at its option, could extend the contract for another 5 years. Under the waste handling agreement, the city would continue to provide the curbside pickup and would transport the waste to the Westbrook, Maine facility. Each household would also be provided with a 35-gallon trash cart that would be provided at Maine Energy's expense. And the size at 35 gallons is a manageable size so that our Public Works Department can continue to use its existing equipment to collect trash in those carts. The city is no longer required to guarantee and pay for a designated minimum tonnage of trash each year. Basically, we pay only for what we deliver to Maine Energy, which obviously we hope would continue to decline if we're able to with our recycling program. The agreement itself is a fairly straightforward agreement. I'm not going to get through all the sort of nuances with respect to times they're open and closed and whatever else, but what's important is that if for whatever reason Maine Energy was not able to accept our waste at the Westbrook facility, the cost of transporting it to another location would not be shouldered by the city, but rather by Maine Energy. So the highlights are $55 a ton for a 10-year period, disposing at the Maine Energy facility in Westbrook.
Any questions on the council before we move to the recycling? Councilor Swanton and Councilor Rames.
What happens if I have 2 cans 1 week? I mean, I guess that's not in the waste handling agreement with Casella, but just to let you know, it looks like we're going to go for paper bag next year, right?
Not necessarily. The idea is 35-gallon for everyone. If you exceed that, then you will have to pay for the excess. So there'll be some sort of bag system or something like that. For the excess, you'll be allowed the 35 gallons free on a weekly basis.
Okay, but we'll think of
the idea being, of course, is that in order to drive down the costs of tipping fees, of the tipping fee, it's essential that we raise the amount of recycling. And one of the ways to encourage recycling is actually to limit the amount of trash that you can actually do for free. So that's the logic behind that. Councilor Rames?
A couple of points. Maybe Brian can speak to this. I mean, one of the reasons for the 35-gallon container remaining the standard size for trash is that this is not going to be an automated system like Guy's been trying to get in Biddeford for the last 15 years. People are going to have to pick these things up. But there's been some stuff lately about Saco's low recycling rates, relatively low recycling rates, been talked about in the 25-26% range. But the issue, one of the drivers in Saco has been the size of the relatively large size of the trash bins that are essentially the same size as the recycling bins. Brian, could you talk about the incentivization of recycling and how the way Saco's done it has not actually worked out that well?
Certainly, there are no set rules in terms of obviously how you would run your MSW program, how you'd run your curbside recycling program. The benefit that the city of Biddeford has is this certainly isn't the first time that a program like this has been implemented. So we're in the great position of having the collective knowledge of literally every other community in the United States that have run these programs. So in terms of making sure that we start using the best system possible to make sure we get the highest participation rate and highest amount of recycling, and thus driving down our tipping fees, is an important one, and one that shouldn't be lost in terms of whether or not we're going to meet our goals for recycling rate. Now, there are a number of different incentives that you can put in place. There are positive and negative incentives. For instance, the size of the can, as you mentioned, currently SACO uses both 65, I believe they use 65 for both, right? 65 for MSW and 65 for recycling. So in terms of making sure that you have enough, that you're maximizing your recycling, one of the things that the programs have found around the country is that the 65 is really too big. A 35 gallon is more than sufficient, and those communities that have started with 65, which is in the case of SACO, are now looking and going, geez, we should have gone to a 35, and now it's that much more difficult, especially if you purchase the cans yourself. Now you have a significant new investment that you have to put in place to be able to get the recycling rates that you want, unless you want to start penalizing people for different, in different routes. And using the 35 gallon to begin with is something that we feel is certainly doable and would be the best approach for getting the maximum recycling that can occur.
Guy, do you want to inject anything?
Yeah, if I just may add to that, and I met with Mike Bolick from SACO over the weeks and specifically this morning, and SACO now is trying to transition to a 35 gallon for their trash. Any new house, new subdivision, or new street they build, they get issued 35s instead of the 65s for the trash, and they're trying to encourage the existing homes to trade in or use their 35 that they had originally for the containers for the trash. So they are in the transition mode, trying to get their container size down to 35 for trash. And for us, as Brian alluded to, the 35 for us works pretty good from the standpoint it does not require us to change our current equipment. Our trucks, our current ordinance allows for up to a 45 gallon can, and we're managing those manually now, so we can continue with our manual operation, although I would tell you it would be nice to go automated at some point, but we could continue with our manual operation, thereby minimizing any need to upgrade the equipment and actually get our workers a break because the can size would be reduced.
Anything else, Richard?
I'm good.
Anybody else before we move to recycling? Keith?
Okay, finally, the third agreement is with Pine Tree, and Pine Tree Waste would provide weekly curbside collection of recyclable materials beginning on July 1, 2013. Recycling collection would occur on the same day as trash collection. In other words, the routes would coincide. People ask why July 1, 2013. I think two primary reasons. One is I think one of the things we've learned from other communities that have kicked off recycling programs is that it's important to have an educational time period where you can educate the public with respect to the processes and the benefits of recycling. Also, July 1, 2013 lets us get us into next budget season to allow the consideration through that discussion, through that budget process. Under the recycling, Pine Tree would provide one recycling cart to each household. The households would have a choice of either a 65-gallon or a 96-gallon recycling cart, and those would be made available beforehand for the public to have an opportunity to inspect and decide what size might work best for them. The annual recycling collection and disposal fee to Pine Tree is $381,000 per year, adjusted by the CPI. Pine Tree would provide the initial carts and would also provide replacement carts of 200 replacement carts per year, and the recycling would be provided to 9,000 households in the city. The term of the agreement, like the waste handling agreement, is a 10-year agreement, with the city having an option to extend at its sole option for an additional 5 years if it wanted to. And then Biddeford and Pine Tree would share recycling revenue over 2,000 tons collected each year. One of the things that's important, people ask what happens to the Biddeford Recycling Center right down the street here. That center would remain open. The city, under the recycling contract, has the ability to exclude municipal and educational facilities from the curbside recycling program and send these recyclables to the recycling center. And Biddeford would be able to continue to receive that. Also, to the extent there are other recyclables that are not part of the recycling program, those also would be collected at the recycling center. Any revenue that's generated from the operation of the recycling center would be kept by the city of Biddeford. Questions?
Any questions? Councilor Bedorowski, then Councilor Rames.
I had asked previously the city manager if we had received quotes on recycling programs to see if this $381,000 was a comparative rate, and it had not been done. I was given information from, I believe it was 2008, when we had gone out to quote, out to bid for the program, and we're using numbers based on that. I don't feel that's sufficient. I was wondering if anything more has been done.
We're going to let Brian move on, but you'll find that there are several panels in this presentation which give you the data from 2008, which was an analysis of a 5-year agreement, the last year being the first year of the contract. Those numbers were very positive with respect to the numbers that we're looking at, and I think Brian will explain those. We also have current data from SACO as early as this morning, which has been translated into the same panel so that you'll get a chance to see actual operating numbers from the city of Saco. We have not bid the process out, and the reason for it is that this is a negotiation for a waste handling agreement, and it's all part of the agreement itself.
So no, and you don't plan?
Yeah, that's where I started, was no, and
Okay.
explaining what you get, and that the public needs to understand that they are getting data, which is a combination of material that was in fact bid over 5 or 7 companies on a 5-year basis, and data that's coming from SACO that's live data as of this time.
Councilor Rames.
Thank you. For Brian and or Kaz, there was a piece in the paper today, and this has been around for a while, an assertion that the recycling program, the drop-off program in Biddeford makes money. Could one or both of you speak to that, and to, I guess if you'd also speak to, there's been an illusion that the recycling, the drop-off program would continue, and could you flesh that out a little bit more?
Okay, the recycling center transfer station certainly generates revenue. I think just last night at the Solid Waste Commission meeting, we presented the unaudited results for FY12. And during FY12, the recycling center brought in approximately $191,000 of revenue. Mm-hmm. It's not profit because our costs to operate the center exceed that number. So those funds certainly help to offset the cost of running the center, but it doesn't make a profit. During this past winter, I broke out for the commission what it cost to do the recycling portion of this center, the operating cost, and that was in the realm of about $240,000, I remember off the top of my head. So does the center generate revenue? Absolutely. This year was probably our highest year, $191,000, but it is not profit. It doesn't generate more revenue than the cost to operate it. As far as flushing out, does the center stay there after we if we institute a curbside recycling program? Certainly the concept in staff's head, and I believe from the council standpoint, the answer is yes, because there are a number of other services that take place there that would not be replaced by a curbside program, i.e. the mixed metals, TVs, computers, oil, batteries, yard waste, shrubs, branches, all those items that would not be part of the curbside program, our residents still have a need to be able to get rid of, and that would still take place at that center. The other operation that would continue to happen at the center under any scenario I see is the commercial recycling that takes place. We, on a limited basis, because of resources, go around town and collect cardboard essentially, because it's the highest bang for the buck, from commercial entities, process, bale it, and market it out of our center. That would continue. That might, depending on resources, may be able to be expanded. And in my head, I've always seen, if we're going to have people coming to that center for dumping off their grass clippings, their demolition, wood debris, all these other items, there seems to be no reason why we wouldn't leave our green containers there, and if they brought their milk jug along at the same time, that they'd be able to dispose of it. So, does it generate revenue? Yes. Does it make a profit? No. And there are many services that take place there that would not be replaced by a curbside program.
Yeah, Councilor Renz, if you want to follow, then I'll go to Councilor Bork.
Thanks. And just to your point, it's a lot like farming. You make revenue, but you don't make a profit. So.
Councilor
Sorry, my
I can speak for horse farmers. That's a true statement for a horse farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Kaz, I mean, obviously, when you have curbside containers for recycle, there's going to be a lot less activity in the recycling part of that facility now.
Yes, we're anticipating that there will be a lot less activity, which is why I mentioned we may be able to take those resources and expand the commercial recycling aspect, or maybe add new services, as some of the councilors have talked about, maybe being able to take in things like sheetrock or other items that have just been undoable to date because of a lack of resources.
Right. Now, how many the facility now takes in about how many tons a year? And I love the program. I love people going there.
How many tons total material?
Pardon me?
Round, and it's been pretty steady, about 12, to all types of material, not just the household commodities, but when you total it all up, it's around 1,300 tons about annually.
1,300 tons?
Yeah.
So you think by more going curbside might contribute to that 2,000, but we may see some revenue share out of the 2,000 tons?
That's part of the curbside collection?
Right.
I don't know, because what we collect at this transfer station would be separate entirely from what they collect curbside. The recycling agreement allows for, if curbside, they collect more than 2,000 tons, then we would share in that revenue. But we, as I understand it through all these agreements, we keep any and all revenue we generate out of the transfer station facility.
Right. Thank you.
Councilor Reddy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the things, just to piggyback on what Mr. Cassavant said at the Solid Waste Committee last night, $191,000 was the total revenue from last year from the recycled materials. $77,000, or right around $77,000, is the items that would be picked up curbside. $114,000 of the 191 are items that have nothing to do with this contract. We received, I think it was a little over $86,000 from the metals. Those are things that are going to continue to be accepted at the Public Works Center. So some of the numbers that we've heard that we're going to be giving up from the recycling center don't really hold fact. It's $77,000 of all the cardboard, paper, and plastics that we receive at the recycling center last year. The majority of the money, most of it, $114,000, are items that are going to continue to be received by us at the recycling center.
Thank you. Any other? Councilor Ajay?
Bear with me because I've been asked to ask this question, and the question is $381,000, $55 a ton for trash. Where's my incentive in order to recycle if we're paying that amount of money and we haven't gone outside of the box in order to get another proposal from somebody else? If somebody could answer that, I would appreciate it. And this is a question coming from a constituent.
Well, and I know City Manager Boubier alluded to the fact that Brian will get into it in more detail in his presentation, but just to speak to the number of 381 briefly here, and Councilor Bednarowski referenced it. In 2008, we went out for bid for this very same service. Closed bid, Public Works was required to place a bid in also. Now, what's important, you say, well, that's 5 years old. Those bids had to have a price for every year for 5 years. So if the city had actually implemented that process in 2008, we would still be under those contractual numbers, okay? So it's not like we're looking at a 2008 number and projecting. Everybody who submitted a bid in 2008 had a price for 2013 to do this service. The low bid in 2008 was the Public Works Department. The number was $335,500. 2013, the year we're in. The next, all the other bids were like $400,000 and above. And those numbers did not, and I repeat, did not include the purchase of the containers. So, in looking at the 381 for the year 2000, July 1st, 2013, that number includes purchasing 18,000 containers, and it includes the service. My number for the year 2013, without buying the containers, was $335,000. Those containers, the 65 gallons are around 45 bucks a piece. The 35 gallons are around 35 bucks a piece. You can do the math. There's well over close to $600,000 of containers that are required for the program. So looking at the 2008 bids, which had a 5-year window and a committed price 5 years out, that number seems pretty good. The other piece is, in talking with Mike Bolduc recently and as lately as this morning, the city of Saco pays approximately $332,000, a little more than that, for their recycling collection curbside this year, we're in right now. That number does not, again repeat, does not include containers. And I would tell you that number is to service roughly 2,000 less households than Biddeford. Saco has, he told me, approximately 6,800 households that they're serving. All our data is based on 9,000 households. So I would tell you and your constituent, my bid, this 381 with the container, seems to even be better than the bid we put in as the city's department 5 years ago for this year coming up, not a bid of 5 years ago. And it certainly seems to be competitive, if not better, than the price that the city of Saco is paying this year currently as well.
Okay, can I continue? The other thing that he mentioned to me was, and I'm sorry, John, but I'm just going to add to another question, is we're looking at 2008 bids. With the economic impact that we're in right now and the nature of the recycling business, this individual is saying probably, and maybe the possibility of getting a cheaper rate could be a possibility. Is that true or not? And I'm asking that as a counselor. It's a question that has been put in my mind, but I'm asking, is that possibility there? Because we haven't gone out to bid since 2008. Is that possible? Is there a probability that that would happen?
I've been around long enough to know that anything is possible. But all the data that we look at from current contracts, and again, I reiterate, our 2008 bid was a 5-year bid, so the 5th year was a set number. We're not projecting. And our neighbor to the north, next door, is current contract, current price of $332 without containers. So is it possible, Counselor? Anything's possible. Is it likely? I would say hardly. I would say it is not very likely at all that would be a better, you could get a better price that would include the purchase of 18,000 containers and 200 additional each year. But is it possible? Anything's possible.
It is an unknown.
Is it anything is possible, I would never back away from that statement, but
Okay.
it's not likely.
I just want to make sure. All right, I do have another question after this,
Okay, let me go to the city
but
manager.
I know the city manager wants to speak also.
I was trying to answer your question earlier. I think Guy Cassavant has answered the question that you asked, probably about 90% of it. But I think that we have to remember that part of this discussion overall has been that Maine Energy has openly stated that they're no longer interested in staying in the incineration business, which means that most of us who have used those services over the past 25 years will be looking for another way of disposing. If you look at the options, at least in terms of dollars and cents currently, if we were to go and use another incinerator, there isn't anybody else who's even close to the $55 a ton. But the other side of it is there's only 2 landfills essentially in the state of Maine that are operating in this kind of a venue. They're both owned by the state of Maine, operated by different folks, but essentially owned by the state of Maine. And we pay, you pay, I pay, everybody at this table, everybody out there has paid for 25 years for waste to be put and placed in those landfills, and yet we haven't really done that. We've essentially incinerated the landfill, the material. I think you have to add, your question was, how do you deal with the $55? I think you got to look at something very simple, and that is every cubic yard that you bury in the ground has a cost and a revenue. But the cost is, what does it cost to replace that cubic yard? What's it going to take somewhere down the line when you build the 3rd and the 4th landfill, which will be paid for by you and everybody in the audience and all of us here, because essentially it's a state function, at least under the current rules. And the cost per cubic yard is phenomenal. And I think that, to suggest that the tipping fee was the only cost to the city of Biddeford taxpayers is not really giving it a good look-see. Because we all pay state taxes, we all pay state fees, and those fees add up to significant dollars. I don't know, I can't remember nowadays what the cost per cubic yard in terms of construction of a landfill, but I think it's up in the $15,000 or $18,000 per cubic yard to reproduce that kind of a facility, a landfill which is a secure landfill. So those are the kinds of costs, Councilor, that have to be added to that as well.
The other thing, too, if I can interject, is what I said at the very beginning. The 3 contracts are intertwined. In other words, the recycling goes with the contract. If there was no recycling, you wouldn't have the purchase price that we did. That was part of the deal. It's a big picture deal. They're all put together like a piece in the puzzle. So in terms of going out to bid, it can't happen because that's part of the deal that we struck. Go ahead.
Okay. One of the things I think is very important is, and I'm asking this as a question, I'm not trying to make statements, I'm trying to ask questions. And my question is that we have other communities that are into recycling. I can think of Saco in that sense. And the comparison of other communities, do we have those numbers? I know I've seen them. I think it's been proposed to me, but I don't think the general public knows that. And I think it's important.
We're going to see that with Brian's presentation. You'll see a bunch of things.
Maybe I'm jumping ahead on some of these things, and I apologize. But I mean, just a quick comment. I've never in my life had so much interest in something, whether it be against it or for it. I've never seen anything like it in my whole political career. And, and the number of questions that I have to ask is just unbelievable. And bear with me, councilors. I'm not usually long-winded, but I'm gonna be. And I need to ask some questions, and please bear with me. The other thing is that the recycling revenue, we talk about 2,000. How realistic is that for this city of Biddeford? What percentile is that? What is it? Is it 40%? Is it 50%? Is it 60%? Do we have a hard number on that?
Actually, as part of the presentation, I'll show you the backup in terms of how we arrived at the 30% estimate that we put in, that plugged into the spreadsheet. We received numbers from a number of different communities through EcoMaine, one of those being Saco, was around 26%, ranged anywhere from 25 to, I think it was 45.6%. The average of those is 35.5, and we actually selected 30 to be a little conservative in terms of picking the numbers. So 2,000 tons is actually less than that. It's around, I think, 22-ish, 22% of the city's numbers. So, you know, I'm very confident that 30% is achievable, very confident. You know, like I said, we have the benefit of learning from the experiences of every other community in the country, literally, that has instituted a curbside recycling program. So I can't imagine we're going to come up with a question that somebody else hasn't already run across and tried to address and come up with a solution to it. We'll have the benefit of actually literally a year to look at all those issues and look at the best solution for Biddeford and implement those as part of the program if it goes forward in July of 2013.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Bedorowski, then Councilor Bork.
Mr. Mayor, I understand this is a bundle deal, and you say we can't look at the recycling program separate. But I have to disagree with that, because we looked at the purchase and sale separate, and we negotiated that price. And I think it's our due diligence to see what the current rate is. 2008, I understand they projected out 5-10 years, but that was based on the 2008 economy, not on the 2012, 2013 economy. And I just think it's our due diligence, whether it comes out higher or lower, to say that we did it. It's going to cost us next to nothing just to go get a couple bids and make sure that we are striking a good deal. And I think if constituents are concerned, we have councilors that are concerned, I don't understand why this process can't be done.
Well, I guess from my standpoint, again, is that, again, this was a combined deal, and I trusted the judgment of staff, and I think everybody trusted the judgment of staff to being experts in the recycling and the waste business to feel comfortable with the numbers, and they essentially were. So, again, I don't see, I know that going out to bid cannot be part of the process at this point in time.
It can't be part of the
It
process?
cannot be, because it's part of the contract as a whole. I mean, in other words, you can, I don't know if you're confusing bidding or getting estimates. I mean, you can get estimates, but again, you're going to see what Saco's paying. But in terms of getting a bid and looking for another company to do the recycling, no.
I understand we can't bring another company in if we strike this deal, but we can ask for bids to compare.
Well, you can, but at this point, again, we've made it, we have an agreement with Casella in terms of what their number is. And
We don't have an
that
agreement,
number's
we have
not
a
going to move.
proposed
The
agreement.
deal on the table is the deal on the table, and that's what we're discussing.
And we don't know if that's a comparable price.
Staff has indicated, the experts have indicated that that's a good deal.
So you're not going to listen to us or the constituents on that?
It's not a question of listening to you, it's a question of the reality of the contract.
The rest of it could be negotiated.
Councilor Bork, then Councilor Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understand a contract is a contract. It has all its parts. And, you know, some of those move a little, but they're all parts of the contract. So it is what it is. We're deciding whether or not this is what we want to do. In regards to the cost of, from 2008 to 2012, I mean, and Kaz can answer this one, obviously, it's the two big components about hauling trash, recycle, or whatever the item might be, is fuel and labor. And neither one of those are less than 2008. So obviously, to project the cost of fuel in 5 years forward, I imagine that contract might be a little light in the cost of doing business in 2012, obviously, looking at $3.50 plus per gallon on fuel. So, I mean, I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with that part of it. But as far as the, you know, another issue that has not been mentioned again here, and should be mentioned clearly to the folks, that there is no minimum, is that correct, on what we recycle? So, I mean, if people want to leave that barrel upside down in their yard and bring their trash to the city for city revenue, so be it. I mean, you know, that's what I'm going to do. But, I mean, I think it makes sense that without a minimum or restriction, they're not saying that we're going to pay a greater fine if we don't give them enough recycle. What they're saying is curbside. They're depending that people basically won't transport their recycle. They'll just put it in the barrel and leave it. But there is no minimum, so I mean, we can still take advantage of our recycle program. Thank you.
Brian or Kaz, do you want to?
Just to dovetail off the Councilor Bork's statement, and again, speaking to this thing in 2008, projecting out to 2012, the year we're in, we were using $4 a gallon for diesel. Guess what we're paying? Really? $3.96. So again, I can't stress it enough. It wasn't like we just bid a price in 2008 and then projected it out. We and all other bidders had to sit there and try to calculate and actually submit a hard number for each of 5 subsequent years. And my diesel price that I used for this year was $4 a gallon in diesel. My labor prices, I had bumped up my labor costs by roughly 3% a year from 2008 going up. So my labor cost is actually a little bit higher maybe than what it actually is, because they didn't get 3% raises all along. So, you know, I would tell you that Biddeford Public Works, based on the numbers we put down, could not supply that service and 18,000 carts for $381. I could supply you that service for $335 something, $335.5, but you'd still have to buy those 18,000 carts at roughly $600,000 or $700,000 for the carts.
Thank you. And the other little addition before I go to Council Mills is to remember that they are purchasing 2 brand new trucks as part of this, so that has to be stretched out to the life of the contract too. Councilor Mills.
Yes, thank you. Seeing how we've gone down this road about the 2008 numbers, being on the council back when we looked at that program, and Guy, you can reaffirm this, one part of the discussion that's lacking up on this side of the table, those companies that we looked at in 2008, not only was it contingent on recycling, but it was also contingent on doing the trash pickup as well. So it wasn't an individual company that was looking to come and do the recycling for curbside pickup. They wanted to do the trash pickup as well.
That is not correct.
That's not correct?
No, the bid in 2008 was for curbside recycling collection. We did a bid for where we would send our trash separately, but the collection service bid was strictly for the recycling collection.
But the company that we were initially going to go with, they would only do it if we did if they did trash pickup as well.
No, that is not correct, Councilor.
That's not the way I recall it.
We did not do a bid for curbside trash collection. We did a bid for curbside recycling collection, and we did a bid for where we could send our trash to, separate, but not, the trash collection was always deemed to be staying in-house with Public Works. And I think what you're confusing is one of the bidders for the curbside collection of recycling in his proposal had offered to build a transfer station at the Public Works facility that he would bring the recyclables to and then truck with big trucks out of there to his markets.
That's correct.
I think you're confusing that with the MSW bid, which was strictly how much would you charge us for us to bring our trash to your facility? But that would have been Public Works. So I think that might be the confusion.
Thank you.
Any other questions on recycling? Councilor Ames?
Just to a point that I think John was making about the costs of dealing with municipal solid waste, to a great extent, I mean, all this stuff eventually goes in the ground, and there are social costs for that. But I think the city manager slightly misspoke in indicating that because of we've been doing business with an incinerator all these years, that the stuff hadn't been going in the ground. It's been processed and reduced in overall volume, but it's still been going in the ground somewhere. All this stuff goes in the ground eventually. And, you know, the larger point, I think, is absolutely correct, that this is a cost that society bears to deal with its waste products. And as Paul Conant used to say, that, you know, the solution with solid waste is to make less waste. And it's possible to do that. That's actually a fairly low-tech thing. You just don't combine materials that can't be recycled with things that can. And I appreciate Guy's remarks. I'm persuaded that I believe it's in Casella's interest, and we've been calling it Maine Energy here tonight, but this Maine Energy, if this deal goes through, Maine Energy is going to cease to exist. This is going to be Casella that we're dealing with, a different structure. And I'll leave it there. But I think this idea that we pick and choose the parts of the contract that we think are advisable to the exclusion of other parts that we don't. I mean, I think it's in Casella's interest to strike a bargain that's in the city of Biddeford's interest here, because Casella's trying to change its business plan. And Casella wants to part company with Biddeford, I think, gracefully. And I think the numbers that city staff has been able to work out, and I think the numbers that Guy's putting on the table tonight show that these recycling numbers, the costs involved here are about as good as we're likely to get anywhere in the Northeast. Thank you.
Okay. Keith, you wanted to finish your?
Yeah, lastly, let me touch upon a couple of questions that came up at the public hearing. As some of you may recall, at the public hearing, the question or the comment was raised that the city can't purchase Maine Energy because in 2005 there was a referendum that failed, and that's binding upon the city, and therefore the city's precluded from exploring purchasing Maine Energy. That's simply not the case. I mean, there was a 2005 referendum, and that was a bond referendum authorizing this, or seeking authorization for the city of Biddeford to borrow the sum of $10 million to purchase Maine Energy, and that was contingent upon the city of Saco and the state also obtaining bonds and purchasing Maine Energy for $30 million with closure at about 10 years. And that deal is nowhere near even approaching the deal that's been negotiated in this particular instance. And so that bond referendum vote back in 2005 simply is inapplicable to what's going on here today. There's also been the question, which is if you went to bond in 2005, if you went to referendum in 2005, don't you have to go to referendum this time? And what's important to remember is back in 2005, not all different than road referendum bonds and all of those issues. The citizens were asked whether the city was in a position, whether they would authorize the city to acquire a bond. In this particular instance, this acquisition would be very, very different. The purchase price for Maine Energy would be paid through operating revenue, the TIF revenue, the cell tower revenue, and then budgeted payments to the extent it was necessary beyond those two sources. That does not require the city to go to referendum.
Thank you. Any particular questions on what he just said? Councilor Bork?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Looking at the big picture here, the whole item, MERC has been an issue as long as I've been around. I've been married to Biddeford 29 years, and it's always been an issue. It's an opportunity we have right now to be done with this chapter in the history of Biddeford, all right? And, I hear people talking about the revenue and the expense and all this, but, what about the expense, the medical expense that's going to cost as years go by? We don't even know what the impact is on the city yet. We'll know in another 10 to 15, 25 years maybe. We don't know right now. And we fought last term to save the environment on the birds and all this. I mean, everything's affected by this. Our pets, with the food that we eat in our gardens at home. I mean, this affects everything in the city, the water we drink, and even if we drink bottled water, we take baths in it, okay? We're absorbing these things into our system. And I mean, the big picture is to remove this from our community once and for all. The deal is sweet, as far as I'm concerned, looking at it, and I've had a lot of dealings with real estate in my tenure in life, and this is a good deal. We can't pick and choose. We're getting what we're getting. I think it's a good deal, it's fair, and we need to be done with this. We just need to move forward. And as far as I'm concerned, this is going to greatly affect the mill district. And, you know, I hear no talk about the revenue. I mean, let's face it, a lot of the people that bought in the mill district, because of MERC, they bought property at a very deflated price, okay? Now, we're not talking, any of the revenues that we're talking about to fund this thing is about, you know, the value, the increase in value that's going to be brought to the mill district. You know, we should be, that should be part of the equation. We should think about reassessing the mill district with this new wonderful opportunity that is available to them now without main energy in the way. You know, this should be part of some of the solution as well. We're footing the bill for the mill district, and that should be their contribution to the city to make this happen. You know, I think we're going to have some great development. I've got a lot of, you know, hopes for the city. I think it's going to happen. But, you know, I mean, they have to be also part of the equation, and I've heard nothing about this or any of these negotiations that the mill people are coming forward with any money. They're going to have to put the money where their mouth is if they're going to benefit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to move to Brian's PowerPoint. If you're in the audience and you haven't picked up a packet, you may want to do that to follow along. If you're the council, you may want to move to the audience if you don't want to strain your, I mean, you can stay there if you want it, but if you want to watch, you can do that either way. Or if you just want to move and go down there for the time being, you're free to do that too. Pardon? Yes.
Seats are more comfortable. There was a second one that said something.
I'm just waiting a minute for everyone to resituate here, and I'll get started. I guess I can start by saying a number of the issues, we tried to hit on the key issues, and a number of the slides we've already talked about, so if that's the case, we'll just kind of gloss over those and answer any questions, obviously, that might come up afterwards. As Mr. Jakes indicated, the financial review, there's a discussion in terms of the, you know, the mill rate and so forth, and thought it'd be important to sort of highlight what the actual impact is, because part of the negotiation was to try to reduce the impacts in year one, so it allows the city to plan for the impacts that would be, you know, applicable in future years. So year one, the way it's structured, it's about 1.8 cent increase in the mill rate that would have to be covered. Year two, it jumped up to about 30 cents. You know, when other elements start kicking in. And then for 3 to 20, it goes from minus half a cent to about 1.6% increases for those subsequent years. The assumptions that we made in terms of the financial analysis and in terms of the general scenarios was we assumed that generally nothing changed, meaning that there's no new development. So when you look at these numbers, keep in mind that we as staff just didn't feel comfortable saying, oh, well, if you do this, there's going to be, you know, 10% growth in new development. I think everyone's confident that there will be, but we weren't confident in terms of how we're actually going to put numbers on those, so we just left it to try and get worst case. So these don't include any development. There's a recycling cost share that's in the contract. We didn't include any of that because that's you know, something that we really can't estimate on. The commercial recycling program, if that gets expanded at DPW, clearly there'll be more revenue. We didn't include that because we weren't able to quantify that specifically. There's a potential that between the time that the site is raised meaning it's brought down to ground level, and new development occurs, there's actually a structure in place where we could use that for interim parking, and parking revenues could be received from that. Even though there's a plan in place, we didn't include that because you know, it's sort of at the will of the council in terms of whether or not they want to go down that road, so we didn't include those revenues, but it is an option. And it also includes the revenue from the cell contracts calculated as actual, meaning we looked at the contracts and some of them have a specific amount of money that increases on a yearly basis or every 2 years. There's other that have CPI escalators, so we actually looked at the actuals, because when we first started talking about this, it was discussed, well, it's $150,000 a year in cell revenue. Well, it's actually 140-ish, 145, 147 to begin with this year, and it goes up based on those escalators. So we've used the actual escalators to calculate those numbers. As Mr. Jakes pointed out, the schedule is important to keep in mind that the earlier, I guess it was 2005, envisioned purchasing the facility, but they were allowed to operate for another 10 years. This is very specific in that if we go with a November closing date, which fits into the schedule administratively, then they basically have 6 months to operate while they're building the Westbrook facility. So if Westbrook is the date, if November is the date on which the signing actually occurs, then by May, the facility actually should be shut down and material should be shifted over to Westbrook. They then have a year from closing, which would be another 6 months to actually demolish the site. So by November 2013, the facility will be in the city's possession and basically be raised, and they can start the redevelopment plans for that site. As Mr. Jakes pointed out, the payment schedule, repayment basically 0-1. There's no payment to Casella in that. They transferred we negotiated the payments to start in year 2 again, so the city has time to plan. Year 2, it's $150,000. Year 3, it's $200,000. Year 4 to 21, $350,000. Total $6.65 million. And the funds for the actual purchase price are covered by the monies from the TIF and the sale revenues. And again, as was discussed by the council, there certainly is no guarantee that the sale revenues are going to remain for the entire length of the contract. And I guess from staff's perspective, we would argue that we wouldn't want them to anyways, because that indicates that the redevelopment hasn't occurred and you're not where you want to be. So while I would agree that there's no way to guarantee that the sale revenues are going to be there, the plan is that certainly the redevelopment offsets those revenues. So when you get to that point, you can either start not renewing those contracts in anticipation of removing the stack, or you've received enough in redevelopment and a new tax base to be able to fund that without concern for the cell tower revenue. I think I might have jumped 2 here. No, okay. The tax losses is another significant issue. Maine Energy pays about $847,000. The state has programs in place that basically assist communities with loss in tax revenue of greater than, I think is it 2% is what the cutoff is? Anything greater than 2% on your tax rolls. And there's been discussions with the state, and they've, in fact, at the staffing level, have confirmed that the city of Biddeford would be eligible for those, and at the staffing level done some calculations on what those numbers would be. And it basically be a revenue share increase of $35,100 to the city, education subsidy increase of $413,000, and then the county tax decrease of $29,000, which leaves basically a tax shortfall of $369,000. So these kick in if we close in November, the $35,000 and the $413,000 would be kicking in for the July 13 fiscal year, and then the county tax kicks in that following year. So I thought it was important to point out that it's not a straight hit on all of the taxes. There's a mechanism in place for the city to be made whole on a portion of that, and it works out to about 56%. The rest of it, obviously, the plan is for new development and as soon as possible to make up that shortfall. There's been discussion in terms of what the actual impact is, and I hope that can be seen. I guess I can't, unfortunately I can't enlarge this, I don't think, from the PowerPoint, but I will actually post this to the website for anyone on the, and in the public that's looking at this, and clearly there's copies available for the public that's here in the audience. The actual cumulative impact for a homeowner of a $200,000 home, based on the contract as it currently is, would be a total $1,664, which averages $79. You can look in the columns and see what the actual is, but the average would be $79, and the cumulative impact would be $1,664 over the term of this contract. One of the other things that we tried to do is say, okay, let's say there's a worst case scenario, and there were some discussions that, well, Maine Energy is going to leave anyways. So what's the worst case scenario if they leave anyways? Well, the city doesn't get any notice. They basically close the door. We look for another place for our waste, and we don't have the ability to plan and so forth. So we took that scenario and actually said, okay, what fees are still in place, and what would the city be looking at if that occurred? And that's basically the next slide. And we selected a date of January 1, 2014. And if they left, and again, everything stayed the same as with the other scenario, we'd be looking at an impact of $1,388, average $66. So the scenario obviously leaves out redevelopment, but we left out redevelopment in the other one as well so that you can get a sort of a worst case scenario comparison there. So I'm just going to bounce back to that earlier slide. 1664, if you go forward with a contract based on the scenario that we've used, and then if Maine Energy just up and gave notice, we're still looking at $1,300 impact. So, you know, for the ability for the city to have a year to plan and to, you know, structure from a budget and have control of that site, it's very, very important for the future of the city. Issues on environment and stack, we discussed that obviously earlier, but I'll just go through that again. The city absolutely has to do its due diligence. Regardless of an agreement with Casella, any piece of property that the city buys, we need to make sure that we understand what our risks are and whether or not those risks are acceptable to us. So phase 1 and phase 2 is part of this plan. If the signing occurs, you know, say at the end of July, we would basically begin that. We have 90 days to complete it. We basically specified the 90 days. That's more than enough time, I feel, to complete that work and make a decision. We've already spoken to contractors. We know what the price is going to be. We've talked about a general scope of work. They didn't see any problem with that either. So very confident in terms of getting the information that we need so that the city can make an informed decision in terms of what the potential risks are. And the contract is very clear that if we're not happy with those risks, that we basically don't have to move forward, and Casella can do what they plan to do with that site. We talked about liability protections, part of the process that we, absent from any issues with Casella, that we, the city, will work through the state to get the VRAP process in place. And what that does is it helps us also redevelop that site in a timely manner, because just as the mill owners did, they had their phase 1s and phase 2, and if they found some low-level contamination, that was identified, and they you know, have those protections as well, and the city would go through that same process. And we did that with the Diamond Match property, we did that with the CMP property, and we'll continue to do that with any other property that we come across and want to purchase. So that process is not new. It's established. It's something that we follow. Like I said, there's ASTM standards for the phase 1 and phase 2, and those are minimums, and we certainly will go and make sure that we have all the information that we need to make an informed decision of moving forward. Casella has the responsibility for decommissioning that stack, for removing the UST's underground storage tanks, and clearly they're required to follow the environmental regulations that are associated with decommissioning of that facility and maintaining their permits until the facility is decommissioned. They give notice that they've ended operation to the state. The city does have the responsibility for ongoing inspections of the stack and the future removal. And as I said, we're very comfortable in terms of the scope of work that we expect to run into. We've got pricing on the inspections. Those are factored into the costs in terms of what the potential impacts are on a mill rate basis. So very comfortable that we'll be able to make an informed decision, and we know what the potential impacts are moving forward. I'm going to actually turn this over to Mr. Stevenson here to talk about the next couple slides, although I'll run through those for him.
Great, thanks, Brian. On the first one was this goal of redevelopment. Right out of the gates, the facility is currently an obstacle to redevelopment in the downtown and the mills. It is an impediment to growth. How do we know that? Well, I can tell you I know that by talking with commercial real estate brokers. I can tell you I know that because I meet with prospects on a regular basis, and every time a prospect looks to relocate in the mill districts, two things come up in the very first meeting. You have a trash incinerator in your downtown. That inhibits me from investing in your downtown. How long is it going to be in business for? What's happening? Are there any redevelopment plans for that? Others just come in the office and talk about it. People around town. There are also businesses that came and spoke at the public hearing that also say either they wouldn't have located here having an incinerator downtown if they knew what they had today, or that they feel that it's an impediment to growth in the downtown. Negative public perception. Those are things such as odor and noise, congestion, wear and tear on the roads, trash trucks coming in with the waste and leaving with the ash. Also, just the idea that we have an incinerator located on the Saco River in a dense downtown just gives negative perceptions. And over the years, it's been vetted through different newspapers. It's just out there. The outside looking in, meaning the development world looking in, has those perceptions as well. The removal of this will spur development. There was a question asked at the public hearing, has there been any feasibility work done? In 2005, I admit that is a little dated based on today. However, 2005 planning decisions did conduct a financial impact study that was financed through the private sector in businesses in downtown Biddeford, and I believe in Saco as well. But the bottom line is, they looked at they were looking at the cost of a $30 million buyout, not something 1/5 of that cost at this time. And essentially, it came down to an objectionable activity or a barrier to a redevelopment of the downtown. If you remove that, what does it mean to either increase purchase price per square foot or absorption? And absorption we use as a development term is how quickly you fill the spaces. And that could be anything from housing to commercial use to industrial use. And they found that in 3 municipalities they looked at, which are Rockland, Westbrook, and Lewiston at the time, in all 3 cases, when that objectionable activity was removed, they move more quickly with absorption, as well as square footage price in sales went up as well. I'd be a little bit careful too by just to go looking at square footage price and sales. I would also be looking at the types of uses. That's very important in terms of highest and best uses and the types of jobs that also are created, as well as net new payroll in the downtown. Those are things that we would continue to look at with updated feasibility work. And then finally, it's not just the removal itself. It does require both public and private sector investment, which is some of the things we're talking about here today. The assumptions that I just talked about are absolutely supported by developers and property owners. I've met one developer on one occasion said, you have an incinerator in your downtown and I won't invest a penny until that's gone. And I say, well, can I have a guarantee in writing? And if you work in the field that I work in, much of what goes on is confidential. Do we have someone in the can right now to redevelop that the highest and best use? No, we don't. But part of doing our due diligence and feasibility moving forward allows us the potential to have the highest and best uses that we would otherwise lose. And I'm going to go through some scenarios to show you that. Scenario number 1. Thanks, Brian. Status quo, we don't do anything. What does it mean? It was stated earlier by the mayor that Casella is out of the waste to energy in terms of incineration business, moving into more recycling. Casella will find a buyer if it is not the city of Biddeford. That buyer could continue to potentially operate that facility as an incinerator in the downtown. It could be as long as another 20 plus years. It could still be an impediment to growth in the rest of the mill during that time. There would be some level of jobs, I admit, and taxes, but there's no guarantee that the same jobs that are there would be there. Also, there's a high level of uncertainty and opportunity costs, and I'll get a little bit more into opportunity costs in a moment. The fuel source options could continue to be municipal waste, same as we have now, but it might not be. It depends of what Casella would do with their contracts. You could look at gas as a potential option, but certainly any new development under just that scenario would be looking for tax abatements, because one of the things that the assessor looks at is an income approach to how he does his taxes. It's not just necessarily a straight up how much investment's put in. However, if there's a lot of net new investment put in, he'll consider that as an option. I've talked to Frank about that. Biomass in construction demolition debris could be another option in terms of burning an incinerator in the downtown. The big question here is we do not know. Scenario number 2. A different use. Casella sells a property entity for a different use. There are many variables, too many to make assumptions in this meeting. However, the possibility is real for vacant or underutilized buildings generated limited jobs, reduced property taxes, and stagnant economic growth, and it would still be contributed to blight in the downtown. What do I mean by this? A buyer could come in and have some ideas, and maybe they've done some work and have some, part of it could be speculative. We don't know that. But the potential is real to wind up with not only a stack standing there without any types of due diligence the city's looking at, as well as a building which may or may not be vacated. The parcel could be broken into a number of pieces that may not have its highest and best use. And at the end of the day, you may not realize the types of jobs, the types of uses, and the types of taxes that you otherwise would if you had control of that site. The opportunity, that's a significant point I want to make in terms of having site control. Scenario 3. Scenario 3 is the city has site control or eventually ownership. It is an 8.5 acre site. It would be a vacant parcel in the downtown adjacent to the river with a high redevelopment potential. The development community sees that as a high redevelopment potential for a number of reasons. One, when we use the term property assembly, it's very important to get large pieces into public sector control, because when the private sector sometimes goes after different pieces, it's harder to jumble a lot of smaller pieces together, i.e. if someone else bought that and broke it up and did different things, it's harder to reassemble those pieces at a later date if you're looking at another use. This is an investment. It will contribute to faster absorption in the downtown and the Mill District space and reinvigorate the site. It's not just me sitting here telling you. Developers got up as well as property owners at the public hearing and had stated the same thing. They meet, the property owners meet with prospects as well as I do, and many times we work in tandem at trying to bring them into the downtown. And sluggish at best, certainly stagnant in terms of really moving growth down, and the having incinerator in your downtown really makes it difficult moving forward with those types of investments. I talked a little bit about property assembly and disposition. For those, that is essentially acquiring property and reselling that property. It reduces uncertainty and opportunity costs during site redevelopment. On the private sector side to development, one of the things that's very important to them is reducing risk and also having a level of certainty moving forward with their investment. And moving forward means how much, well, I'll get into development in a moment from a development standpoint, but when developers are looking at redeveloping a site, they want to say, how do I minimize my risks from my investors and investment, and how can I move forward in a timely manner to get the redevelopment moving? And the types of due diligence that we're doing, we can prep that site for redevelopment, and I'm going to explain that in just one moment in the next slide. You can. Well, he went ahead, but I'll keep moving. Redevelopment process involves a number of phases. Year one is pre-development. What does that mean? We're doing that now. You meet with developers, you meet with commercial real estate brokers, and you say, hey, what would you do? Not only are we trying to get you to invest, but we're also saying, if you're not willing to invest, what would you do with this site if you had this site on the river? Then you talk with commercial brokers, not just about trends, but what's actually happening on the street level right here in the city of Biddeford, in cities of Biddeford and Saco. What's moving, what's not? What makes sense for us to move forward for highest and best uses of that site? Is it a single end user? Is it mixed use development? What makes the most sense? We're doing that now. Then as we stop pulling all those pieces together, we put out essentially another much higher end feasibility study, and it looks at market feasibility. What is the market based off the discussions we've had? What are the financial implications moving forward in a fiscal impact analysis on the types of uses in other feasibility? By way of example, the type of analysis you might see doing retail would be different than you do, say, medical office space or university research space. It's different the way it's done, but what we want to do is narrow the scope to the highest and best uses. We lay out a feasibility study to bring that back to the public to say, here are the highest and best uses. The best way to redevelop this site in a timely manner is X. And then we would take that and put that on the street in the form of an RFP. The council at its purview can put a number of conditions around that. By way of example, if you didn't have site control of it, you don't know what the reinvestment level could be on that site. The city can put conditions upon an RFP for redevelopment based off a feasibility study and market analysis and say, in terms of the growth and the build-out, we're looking at $100 million of redevelopment. We're looking at this many jobs and this much net new payroll in the community if you're interested in moving forward with this. Developers are and will be interested, and I'm not just talking local developers, I'm talking about developers that do look at national searches for redevelopment in compact urban areas on a site adjacent to a river. And then the remaining phases, when we talk about site engineering and analysis, that helps us remember that level of certainty. One of the things we could do on the city side moving forward is we try to get as much pre-permitting in place as possible based off the types of build-out scenarios that we would move forward. We could get additional engineering done at that time, and then we'd look at the financing options. Although most of that would be coming from the private sector, there still is a public-private partnership, and the city would be involved in that deal, certainly. And then the remaining phases really, they deal with the marketing, the construction, the approvals of when you go in to do your construction, building occupancy, management, what have you. Those phases would be taken up by the private sector upon redevelopment of that site. Now, when I talked about how would we move forward with the types of in-depth feasibility work and market analysis, we could use existing TIF dollars to do that at this time, so that we wouldn't have to go back to the city to look for additional funds to do that. Thank you.
Moving on to the next component, which is basically the MSW, and we discussed that in some detail with the council as Mr. Jakes was reading through the contract, but I'll just hit the highlights again. The city does retain the MSW collection, will continue to perform that work. The 35-gallon containers are compatible with the current process, so there's no modification to any of the equipment. The MSW would be transported over to the Westbrook Transfer Station, which would be constructed post-signing and before May of 2013, if in fact we actually do the paperwork and signing and so forth in November. There's no staff reduction in DPW, $55 a ton tipping fee. Currently, Saco pays $80.72, and the Tri-County estimated based on the CPIs is, because each one of them has a little bit different, but they're in the range of $85.76. So from a pure optics standpoint, the $55 per ton is certainly competitive. I would also say that if there's an assumption that our current pricing, we currently pay $46.33 per ton, which goes up on the CPI escalator. If there's an assumption that, okay, if we don't do anything, we're just going to continue with our current contract, there are two elements in our current pricing that are going to go away in the future, probably by, it depends on how many tons we actually dispose of, but let's just assume that Casella will say, okay, we're just going to continue with our current contract. Those two components are the settlement of two lawsuits. One of them was EVOD, which is effective value upon dissolution, and the other one, I can't think of it off the top of my head, Keith. Mr. Jakes, do you remember what the other one is? The property tax abatement. Those account for over $25. So our current pricing jumps up to at least $75, regardless, even if you do nothing. So to assume that there are no impacts if we do nothing would be a mistake, because there are impacts, and the city, at least through the purchase of this, has an understanding of what those are and can plan around those, as opposed to just continuing on, well, guess what, mill rate's going up because our costs go up. So the other components of this, Casella is purchasing and supplying each household with a 35-gallon container for trash. As Mr. Cassavant pointed out, in the prior analysis that the city has done, that we've purchased those. So that's a considerable cost savings to the city. We estimated that if you take the amount of 9,000 trash, 9,000 recyclables, and then the 200 additional per year for each of those, if the city were to purchase those and finance them over 10 years, you're looking at about $119,000 each year. So you add that to the cost that Mr. Cassavant pointed out earlier in terms of the curbside recycling program, and we can't come close because of the financing when we add the containers in there. So from a cash standpoint, in terms of what the city is capable of doing in its own, we can't match the price that has been negotiated in the contract. In terms of curbside recycling, Again, the city retains the transfer station. The city retains the revenue from deliveries to the transfer station, all the steel, the metal, all that other materials that come on, and the incidentals that people might drop off. The city retains the recycling if it chooses for the municipality, the municipal buildings and the schools. That's at our option. We can either choose to have that shifted over, or we can retain it ourselves. If we retain it ourselves, we'll get the revenue directly. If it goes to Casella, there's a potential you can get the cost share. So there's a cost-benefit analysis that goes in there, but it's our option. Possible expansion of the commercial recycling program, as Mr. Cassavant pointed out. If it turns out that the high recycling rate and there's staff time is freed up there's a potential that we could either expand that for commercial drop-off. They can use that as commercial drop-off for recyclables, or they can expand the current program where they actually go out and actively collect those recyclables, which would be an additional revenue source for the city. No reduction in DPW staff based on the curbside recycling program. Essentially, the city's understaffed as it is, so any reduction could either be going to the expanded commercial program or filling in for duties that are being taken care of now. At curbside recycling program, a very important component is the extended education program. One of the things that I've seen continually in research of curbside recycling programs, and everyone that we've spoken to has reiterated, is if you're going to spend any money doing anything, make sure it's education. There's not an issue that's going to come up, in my opinion, that we can't resolve. The problem is, if you wait till the last minute, you might get 80 questions that you're trying to resolve quickly, and that's what makes it difficult, not finding this solution. It's giving you enough time to plan for those and find the solution. And a couple concerns were, well, what if I recycle more than a 65-gallon container? Well, there's going to be a 96-gallon container available. Well, what if there are multiple, you have a multifamily that is currently being picked up and they want to participate? Well, guess what? You have multiple 95s or multiple, there are answers to all these questions. We need to give ourselves enough time to work through all those. So that extended education period is critical. Casella is also providing $5,000 for that education plan and $1,000 a year for continued education. So that's covered in the negotiation. They supply up to 200 additional replacement containers, so as they're damaged and so forth, those can get replaced, no cost to the city. And there was a comment earlier about the 35-gallon container and moving that around. All these containers are actually wheeled, so you basically tip it down, you can wheel it to the curb and wheel it back. And if someone has a problem, you say it's a person that lives alone and an elderly person, they say, well, I can't wheel around at 65. We can make allowances for those kind of things. We just need to know about them and plan for it appropriately. It also involves weekly collection of the recyclables. In terms of the evaluation of the costs, we did a cost comparison. The current proposal, $381,000, that includes 9,000 recycling containers, 9,000 MSW containers, 200 replacement containers, and it covers approximately 9,000 households. We just recently got the numbers from SACO to look at the actuals. Their current cost is approximately $332,000. It doesn't include the containers, and we know, based on our math, we're looking at $119,000 for 10 years to finance those containers if we purchase them, and it's 7,000 households. So we're doing 2,000 households more, $119,000 in additional cost. It's a very competitive price. I've got a link here that jumps to the spreadsheet. I'm going to try it. Hopefully it's going to work. There we go. Good. There's several reviews that we did in terms of costs. Let me see if I can get the right one here. In terms of containers, the 2008 bid included cost of containers, so we have a good understanding of what those costs are and the numbers, and we can certainly do the math, so we're comfortable in terms of that. From a collection standpoint, this basically just shows the, this one I can increase, so I'm going to increase the size here to hopefully people can see it better. I guess that's a little better. That first column under EcoMaine, the proposal required the collection of MSW in a couple of different scenarios, and you can see the various bidders are on the left-hand side here, and I'll scroll down. But for the Biddeford with pay-as-you-throw was the 341 that Mr. Cassavant talked about, and you add 119,000 to that for the containers. Oceanside didn't bid on that. BBI, $615,000 would be this July, starting this July. BBI was pay-as-you-throw, $667,000. Waste Management, $619,000. Waste Management with pay-as-you-throw, $619,000. Pine Tree, $948,000. Pine Tree with weekly service, $579,000. So we did a formal RFP. Everyone had to submit, and they had to submit the yearly numbers, and basically they would have been held to those. So it's important to put in perspective the reality in terms of the pricing on that. Is there anything? I saw you shifting. I didn't know if you had wanted to add anything to that.
Well, and I think this may be part of the discussion with Councilor Mills that, again, these bids were for recycling collection, but companies gave us a different price for the recycling collection service depending on what we did with our trash. If you see on the spreadsheet, it's Pine Tree waste or some of these trash as is, or trash with pay-as-you-throw or a limited container. So maybe that was part of the confusion, that this spreadsheet that was distributed in 2008 had all the bidders, but these were all bids from companies who were proposing to do recycling curbside collection, but they gave us different numbers for that service depending on what we might be doing with our trash collection. But that was going to stay in-house.
The next thing we did as a litmus test was do the actual math and compare if we purchased the containers using those actual numbers. So we did the FY11 residential amount, took the 30%, and again, comfortable with the 30%, and I'll show the backup for that in a minute. Gives you recycling tons. We had some revenue that was provided for as one of the scenarios at $20 a ton. So you know, assuming that's still the maximum you can get, and assuming you would get that for all tons that you delivered there, we used that number. So the total potential revenue would be $46,000. So if you look down at the weekly, Biddeford's 2008 number was $341,000, and again, that would have been applicable July 1 of this year. $119,000 a year for those containers if you finance those out 10 years, brings you at $461,000. And even if you subtract out the $46,000 of potential revenues, we're at $415,000, and the current proposal within the contract is $381,000. If you don't include any revenue, and of course that could fluctuate depending on what the market shows, it could be as high as $461,000 if the city did it, and the next closest bid, again, applicable this year based on those RFP results, $692,000. So based on that information, we were comfortable that this is a very competitive number in terms of the pricing. From recycling rate, we collected information through EcoMaine in terms of what their estimates were, and for recycling, and SACO actually confirmed their number today when Mr. Cassavant talked to them, and you can see the highest is 46.5, and they had a pay-as-you-throw program. The lowest is 25. The average there is 35. So when we pick 30%, I'm very comfortable that that's achievable and it's appropriate number, and I would expect that we would get higher than that, because again, we're not the first community to implement this, and if we implement it the right way the first time, we should have very high participation and very high recycling rates. Impact to other funds. See if I hit that twice to make sure. Yep. Impact to other funds, though the discussions in terms of the spreadsheet, in terms of the mill rate, there are other programs within the city that are not tax roll related, they're self-funded. One of those is the air toxic program. That program basically has the ability to scale to match the revenue, and we've looked at that, and it's very doable in terms of the time requirements and so forth. So there'd be, that program would be sustainable. The industrial pretreatment program is currently structured in the ordinance so that the fees cover the costs. So even though there's an impact there, the program was able to continue. Sewer user fees, it's also structured so that the fees cover the cost, but it'll also be offset by new development. Don't expect any significant increases to the current ratepayers. Again, we haven't factored any new development, but that would offset it. But the current impact is around $96,000 total that they pay out of a $4 million budget. So from a impact standpoint, there should be a negligible impact, and as soon as development starts to kick in, those impacts, to the extent that they're there, will certainly be offset. And that's really the extent of what we put together. Again, we tried to hit the highlights on that. I think the important thing to remember when look at the numbers is they do not include any of those potential revenues that we had factored in. We tried to be as conservative as possible. And as Mr. Stevenson pointed out, the redevelopment of that property, if the city has control of it, is a professional process. It's not now we own it, we have to wait for people to come in and tell us what they want to do with it. We have the ability to control the site, to look at the highest and best use, and to develop that site to the best benefit of the city in a timeline that works best for the city. And with that, I'll turn it back to the mayor.
Thank you very much. Anybody from the council have questions of the presentation? Councilor Rames.
Thank you. I think it was after the first meeting that we had on this deal, and I was talking to Dan Stevenson, and the council has been hearing now recently for the last few months that the incinerator operating in the middle of the downtown is a detriment. Some of us have been singing that song for a long time, but politically it was not welcome. It was not included in the political hymnal. Dan did a brief stint in Biddeford as a city planner here some years ago, and I hope you won't mind, but he confided to me that that he made a comment one day to his peers in City Hall about I think the term was white elephant. You referred to the incinerator, and your impressions coming to Biddeford new. And I wonder if you could talk about the reaction that you got then, because it's a reaction most of us who have not thought this was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and how that's changed of late.
Sure.
If you don't mind.
Sure, Councilor. Sure, Councilor. I did make such comment, I don't know, 14 years ago, 13 years ago, however long it's been. At that time, coming in as an outsider looking in, it certainly goes without saying, in the 1980s, there was a lot of discussion around that anyway. But coming in saying and looking at the potential growth of the mills at that time, was looking at it with, say, a planner's hat versus an economic developer's hat. And some of the response I had received at the time was, well, you know, you're not the development director for the city at this time. So I decided to stick more at straight up planning initiatives for the town. But, you know, coming back now, again, as a development director of the city is very exciting to me. And it's very exciting to me for a number of reasons. Growth will happen in Biddeford and Saco. You have an opportunity to control that growth in this particular time. Very rarely do municipalities have an opportunity to take what will eventually be a vacant piece of land, going through the VRAP process, to be able to move forward with the bona fide studies needed to get it up and moving for redevelopment. And that's just the site itself. That does not talk about how the removal of this, the investment on the city side, as well as attracting private sector capital, will really move towards faster growth or absorption rates in the existing mill themselves. And you're not just hearing that from me. You'd be hearing that from any one of the mill owners who also try to fill those spaces. And there's been some wonderful attempts, and I'll praise Doug Sanford for moving forward and putting a number of businesses in this building. But I'm also referring to some large end users. I'm in recent conversation with some large end users that are that may be very committed to a large investment in the downtown if MERC goes away. I can't say any more than that at this time, but I also don't want to sell any of you a bill of goods saying that's absolutely going to happen the second they go away. There is a prescribed process. It does take a little time. We've done everything that we can to mitigate the impact to the city and the residents, but I'll tell you, it would be really difficult to come to you, say, 24, 36 months from now and say, look what happened. We lost an opportunity, meaning The opportunity costs of not buying this outweigh it if we were to buy it. Because if another end user went in there, that essentially jobs still go away or are reduced to a significant level, or another end user goes in there that doesn't have the same investment or does not operate with the same income level, you could have a tax abatement happen and a reduced level of property taxes anyway. This is if the city does nothing. So I think it's very, very important. And I think the opportunity here for the city to move forward in a new era and redevelop its downtown, it is the city's growth area with natural gas and a number of beautiful buildings and architecture. And we do have developers telling us that's very important. You watch cities like Lowell when they see investment in their downtowns from the public sector. You even look at the city of Biddeford. It's a little bit different because the private sector had to come in and redevelop some of those sites. But the bottom line is you have an opportunity to control the highest and best uses moving in there and put some rules around that and put some parameters around that to redevelop that site and frankly get more taxes, jobs, and payroll than you have at this current time. It does take a little bit of time, but the long-term effects to the city are much greater positive impact than not doing anything, frankly. And one other thing that was touched upon as well is that what are the long-term environmental impacts in the community if it continues to operate yet another 20 years, potential of another end user? You have an opportunity to make that go away as well and move forward and attract private sector development. Thank you.
Councilor Rames?
Thanks. To that last point, I was talking to Brian Finney today, and of course Brian wasn't around here 25 years ago, but some of us were. And I recounted to him this little vignette about when we were trying to get the dioxin, a peer review of the dioxin testing protocol at the facility when it was new. And a prominent local person who'd been involved at a high level of government environmental oversight showed up at the council meeting, and we had a lot of this back in the day, that there are no downsides to having an incinerator in the middle of your downtown. And this person literally said, dioxin is just a buzzword. Brian, does that statement wash with you?
Dioxin is certainly a real pollutant. The city of Biddeford and the state of Maine have the unfortunate reality of being at the end of the tailpipe for the nation. If you watch the weather in the morning, you will see the jet stream, and invariably it comes across the Northeast 9 times out of 10. So all the emissions that are occurring throughout the United States are basically coming across the state of Maine and the Northeast. Dioxin is a real pollutant. The facility and any incinerator, when you're combusting, any number of materials, you're generating dioxins. The facility is in compliance with its permit. I haven't seen any other facilities in the state that aren't in compliance with their permit. But to be able to reduce a point of emissions is a good thing. So I certainly disagree that dioxin is a buzzword, and I certainly do agree that removing any source of dioxin from any community is a positive step, regardless of how small.
Thank you.
Councilor Mills?
Yes, I just wanted to thank you, Guy, publicly for digesting what I had stated earlier about the 2008 process that we had went through. Like we had been discussing, there was actually 5 RFPs that were put. It was 5, correct? That were put out for different categories, and each one was contingent on what we were going to do with our MSW. And the end result was what I was implying. But sometimes when I get a little bit older up here on the council, I kind of mix up what I'm trying to say. So but the company that we were going to go with was strictly contingent on pretty much doing everything. Is that how I recall it? Oh, he doesn't have a mic now. He can talk loud though.
You're correct, the bid for curbside collection of recyclables, there were 5 different bidders, exactly, and each bidder gave a different price depending on what the city did with its MSW. But the bid was not for collection of MSW.
Yeah.
The firm that was getting that bid on the purchase of our recyclable items was going to build us a transfer station and do all that stuff. That was a separate proposal.
Right.
Yeah, I think the confusion is, that's the spreadsheet you're talking about right there.
Yeah.
It was distributed, 5 bidders, and each bidder gave a different price depending on what the city did on the MSW side.
Right.
The bid was not for collection of MSW.
Yeah, no one would pay the pay program or whatever.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go to the audience again, just to remind you of the format. This is not a public hearing, so it's not a time for you to say you're for or against a particular contract. It is to ask a specific question, and a department head or staff member or one of us will answer it. I'll allow you a question and a follow-up, and then if you have any other questions, go back to the line so I can keep people moving forward. So if you come, there's a microphone to the back, there's a microphone over here. Identify yourself, ask your question, and we'll proceed. Mr. Pelletier.
Old Pelletier Ward. Old Pelletier Ward 3.
Yes.
I'm looking cumulative homeowner impact. One state. Fiscal year 13, tax increase for $200,000 house would be $3.60. Correct? 14, $67.20. Correct?
Kurt, you want to?
That's the total over the 2 years.
Right.
Yep.
That's what the tax is going to be. For MERC only, fiscal year 14 will be $67.20 for that year on a $200,000 house.
No, it'll be $63.60 for that year, because you have the first year is $3.60, the second year it's $3.60 plus $60. The third year, it's $3.60 plus $60 plus $2.40. But the last column is how much you have paid over the total of all the years.
Right.
Yeah.
So the first year we're paying $3.60. The following year we're paying $67, going by the mill rate.
You will have paid over the 2 years an extra $67.20.
In fiscal year 15, we'll be paying $133.20 extra.
That your change from 14 to 15 in your tax bill will be $2.40. But the change from the current tax bill will be $66, the total of $360, $60.240. So your tax bill will be $66 higher in year 3 than it is without anything.
See, here it says the total.
It's the total paid over all years. The total extra taxes you would have paid over all years total since the beginning.
See,
Sir, if this is, I see what he's getting at. If you look at this column, you pay $67.20 the first 2 years.
Microphone, please.
I'm sorry.
Folks at home here.
Sorry. What he's saying here, your column isn't added correctly.
It is.
Well, if you look, you pay $3 the first year.
You pay $360 the first year.
Excuse me.
The second year you pay $60 plus $360.
Right, for a total of $67.20. Correct?
Plus the $360 from the first year. You pay $63.60 the second year, plus you've already paid $360 the first year. That gets you the $67.20 cumulative to that point.
So you're doing $67.20 times 2 plus the $240. Is that what you?
Now, if you, right in the middle, your estimated tax bill column, you see it starts at the top with $3,336. That is at the estimated tax rate that we're working on right now. And then the next one down is $33,3960, a difference of $360. That's the estimated tax bill with the MERC deal in the first year. And so on down the column so that you end up in the 21st year with an estimated tax bill of $3,425.20, which is an increase of, on the individual year's tax bill of only about approximately $86. But we've taken the total extra you pay over the whole life of the deal comes up to the $1,664. That's not per year. That's the total extra dollars you've laid out over 21 years.
I'm still as confused as I was.
Okay, if you want to digest that, so I can allow somebody else to speak.
Well, what I did is I took the mill rate of .018, multiplied it by 200, and I got to 336. The following mill rate is .3188. Is that correct?
The change from year 1 to year 2 is 0.3. The total change from year 0 to year 2 is 0.318. It's not change from year to year. That's cumulative from the beginning.
See, I got all your numbers off the website. And the way it was, 1 year is .018, the following year is .318, and it wasn't explained like that.
Well, that one on the website was done as each of those mill rates was the difference from the current to that year, not the difference from year to year. Each one of those referred way back to 2013, not from 15 to 16 or 16 to 17. Everything was referenced to 2013. That's why this one was made to show the difference year to year. The change from prior year column is the change in the mill rate from year to year. The change since FY13 is the cumulative change from the beginning of the contract to that year you're looking at.
Doesn't make sense.
Okay, yes, sir. The gentleman in the yellow shirt.
Bill Adams for... Sorry. I don't look, mine is yellow. I understand your chart here. I find the cumulative homeowner impact chart dishonest, to say the least. You're saying that the total impact is $79.28 over the years, but you put in negative numbers in your mill rate. So if you want to really show the people of Biddeford the potential for what might happen, by looking at page 2, years 3 through 20, you have a negative rate of 0.5 cents to 1.6. I think you should have put 1.6 cents in for every year after 2015 all the way down, which would have resulted in the final mill rate of 17.318 instead of 17.126. I didn't do the rest of the math, but having a negative mill rate in a chart like this does not show the people of Biddeford how they might be affected.
Thank you. Kurt?
Basically, we did this, all other factors being equal. These are simply the estimated impacts to all the items we could think of from the Maine Energy Casella deal. Some years, the impact is less than it was the year before, slightly. Some years it goes up. We put that in just from the numbers that were derived from that analysis. And sometimes they were slightly negative, sometimes they were slightly positive. There was only one good-sized year in there, and that's when the first year that the full impact hits us. And then after that, the changes from year to year are relatively small, and sometimes they're slightly negative. So these changes in the mill rate reflect simply the estimated impacts of the MERC deal with nothing else in the city changing, because we could not quantify anything else. We're looking at this with a very narrow scope, that's true, but we could not, there were too many other variables that we could not forecast, and anything we would forecast could be very wrong and very misleading, so we stuck straight to the MERC, direct MERC impacts.
Thank you. Ken, in the yellow shirt.
My name is Ken Bix, Ward 1. I'd like to focus on the tax impact. As an editorial, I think that if we had used the same projections when we discussed the budget a couple of weeks ago, it would have had a tremendous impact when you looked at 20-year impact of that increase. But tonight, I want to reflect on the comments I've heard from people up there over the last several weeks. And first, it was going to be no impact to our property taxes. And it was changed to little impact, then some impact, and tonight we have some detailed data, certainly. So I think I knew what Councilor Mills referred to when he changed his vote and voted for the slight budget reduction when he said what's coming down the road, and this is what was obviously coming down the road. And treat this simply as a rhetorical question because I don't know that you know the answers, but can't we get some financial help outside of the city? Now, we have a state legislator here this evening. We have a development director here this evening. I found that the mayor of Saco's appearance, he didn't bring any money with him. He certainly sees the benefit, so he's going to support us because if you pay zero and you get a tremendous economic benefit from moving MERC, you can see where he's coming from. But I'm looking at, and as I say, my naivete of federal or state grants or funding.
Certainly, if you could just get to a question again, I know this will be reserved for the 17th, a lot of what you're saying,
okay. But are there opportunities to get help for the city of Biddeford in this acquisition? Because I think the price is right. I'm concerned that we find the money to support it. And I'm looking at big businesses in town. I mean, banks make grants to good purposes all the time. We have UNE, we have the Southern Maine Medical Facility, and have we reached out and looked for help in that area? Thank you.
Thank you. John?
Ken, I think during the tax loss, panel that was up a bit earlier, I believe that Dan Stevenson indicated that there was a potential, as you look at the sudden and severe impact, revenue sharing increasing by $35,100, education subsidies increasing by $413,358, and the county tax decreasing because of the sheltering effect of the way the TIF is done by $29,134, leaving a shortfall that started at $847,372, leaving a shortfall down at about $369,000. So better than 60% of that has been reduced already. So I think that there has been some searching and some implementation of new monies coming in. The panel that you're referring, that the last conversation was referring to, talks about an average of somewhere around 34 cents per thousand on average throughout the life of the contract. We've shown lesser impact in the first year because essentially Casella pays 50% of the bill and then pays the other half of it as some type of an arrangement that will work out with them because they'll be there for the term of time until their facility is built in Westbrook. Second and third year, you'll notice you begin to see a ramp up there. Our banking on this is that within the first year and the knockdown period, there are going to be people who will hear about it, and that we will begin to see additional building in the North Dam facility, in the Lincoln Mill facility, in the Doyle Gerard building, which is the old Saco Lowell. Quite frankly, you don't have to put in a ton of new development to go to zero, based on this tax rate in column 4 on the cumulative homeowner impact of 2,000K. So I think there is a plan. And that was a question that was asked on the Tuesday public hearing. Is there a plan? And I think the panels here tonight really have outlined that plan and have addressed your question.
Mr. Lambert?
May I interject on that, please? Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
John, can you please confirm that sudden and severe has been granted to us?
You have to have the loss before you can apply for the material.
So that's not guaranteed?
You have to have the loss in order to be able to apply for the funding. We have talked to the folks at state level, have given them the scenario, and we are in fact eligible.
We are eligible, but it is not guaranteed, correct?
Well, I can't guarantee I won't get hit by a bus tomorrow morning either.
Right.
But the point I'm driving at is we are in fact eligible. The staff at state level have judged us as being eligible. There's money in the rainy day fund, so which is where it comes from.
We also have a governor that's
I'm not
a lot.
making light. There is a fund called the Rainy Day Fund, and it's at state level. That's where this money is found.
I've also talked to staff that if there was any impediment at the state level in terms of getting that designation, that I'd introduce a bill to, just as Millinocket, I believe, has done in the past too, but to introduce a bill to expedite that whole process. Mr. Lambert.
I have a question about the recycling program. Currently, I bring all of my recycling to EcoMaine because they take more of it. They take numbers 1 through 7 plastic. Will we be able to recycle more than number 1 and 2 plastic with the curbside recycling program?
The contract does have the list, and I think the answer is yes, more than just 1 and 2s, but not, going by memory, I need to pull it out. I think number 6s, as I remember, as we discussed last night, Paul, right? I think number 6s of unacceptable material. I think number 6s are the unacceptables, and if something has been contaminated.
Exhibit number 2 to the recycling agreement provides that plastic containers number 1 through number 7, except for polystyrenes, are acceptable materials, and all plastic or glass bottles or jars are acceptable recyclable materials as well.
Okay, thank you. And will businesses be able to participate in the curbside program? Would we be able to have a container placed behind our business, either in the short term or in the long term?
The recycling collection and disposal agreement contemplates, under acceptable recyclable waste, household recyclables, and it has not been expanded into business recyclables. Although the discussion or contemplation is to expand the recycling center to add business recyclables at that location.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Terrian.
Paul Terrian, Ward 2, and it's funny, that's exactly what I was going to bring up, was under the recycling agreement, Exhibit 2. My concern, and we discussed them last night, I think 4 of you were there last night, was that it does not, in fact, include polystyrene. So that means we're saying that it's going to be single source. Already there's an exception. Polystyrene will not be able to be thrown into the single source recycling. And as I see it, they've also left off shredded paper. So I think maybe you need to work out those 2 details. And the same thing on Exhibit 3, which is the next page, where it talks about what's unacceptable. It also says wax cardboard is also not acceptable. So those are just small details that I think we need to work out. I also understand this is not the time for me to pass judgment on this. This is just a matter for me to ask questions. So those are 2 questions I had. And the other question I had was to the Mill District redevelopment. When this plant is gone, how many square feet will be available for redevelopment at approximately what cost per square foot?
Thank you. That's subject to, I'll answer your second part of your question first. There are so many variables at what cost. It all depends on how the package comes together, so hold that for one moment. It's an 8.5 acre site, and essentially almost all of it is impervious. And remember when I talked earlier about doing as much pre-permitting as possible? I think all or most of that site would be available for redevelopment, but part of it is how you lay that out. When I talked about highest and best uses, if it's a mixed use, you have to look at how to move pedestrians through there. You'd look at how you deal with parking. You'd look at how much buffer and green space. You look at a number of these, how high you want to go. Part of those, when we bring a feasibility study back together, we look at how tall buildings are going to be that might go in there. What are the types they're using? Is it going to be residential housing? You're going to have some commercial space in there. We look at all of these things, and we put together 3 or 4 scenarios. That would directly affect the total package of what the cost of redevelopment is. Now, how do you buy down those costs? 2 things. One of the things I said earlier, the private development sector, they run cash flows like anyone else. Biddeford is in competitive mode with everybody else. And what we want to do is make ourselves a little less competitive. In the private sector, they come in and they look at it, they say, the quicker I can get in there and build what we need to build based off a lot of the baseline work the city's done, the more apt we are to invest in the city of Biddeford. Because we do have those assets, such as the hospital, such as UNE, such as the train, such as the river, such as great architecture. I can go on and on. I didn't want to go to that level tonight, but to be very clear, the outside development world is looking in, and they're very intent at what they're looking in at the decision to buy this out right now, quite frankly. I think to answer your question, sir, about are there other public sector dollars we can look at, there absolutely is, but it wouldn't be part of the acquisition, it would be part of the redevelopment. Because when the private sector comes in too and they run their cash flows, they run things called discounted cash flows as well. They look at what is the total all financial impact to them, and if the deal doesn't cash flow, they walk away. They don't personalize it, they don't think through all the different things that we have to, we want to, they walk away. We can partner with them as part of a total package deal to make it desirable for investment. By way of example, one of the things we are looking into right now, working Senator Collins' office, is a potential of new markets tax credits available there. I'm not saying that they will be at the time of redevelopment, but if that's something that does come to bear, coupled with the state's similar program, which will be available in 2014, those types of incentives help incentivize private sector capital into that space. The bottom line is the city has an opportunity to control redevelopment of 8.5 acres in its downtown. If you don't take that opportunity, you don't know what you have coming. It's that simple. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Sexton. Yep, it's on.
Grady Sexton, Ward 1. I'm also the Vice Chair of the Downtown Development Commission, and we've been asked to ask the questions about recycling. How will you address residential units downtown? In particular, one that has a zero lot line and no facilities to store any type of recyclables.
Certainly those logistics are going to be worked out, but these programs are in cities throughout the country, throughout the world, big cities, small cities, congested cities, rural cities. So the answers are out there as to where people will put their containers. I am assuming a lot of these buildings, although the apartment may not have space, but there may be a cellar space. The apartment building itself may have some area that the containers can be put in. If there's a situation whereby there's absolutely no space and all that, then I'm sure, like Brian had said before, we're not on the cutting edge here. We're not developing a new system that isn't out there. These have been out there. They've been out there for 15, 20 years at the very least, and there are specific answers to every specific problem. I don't have the particular answer tonight, Grady, but we will get there. If this flies and it goes through, we have a year to get answers to all those type of questions. And I guarantee you there's an answer. It's been dealt with, and it's come across someplace in this continent before Biddeford, Maine.
Okay, because the situation this gentleman has is it's a private road behind his building. He has no cellar, owns no space except what the building physically sits on, and has basically, it's either store the garbage in somebody's office or whatever. But at least he's most likely listening tonight. I mean, he's hearing your answer.
He's storing his garbage someplace now, correct?
Yes, I believe each individual, is storing in their own unit.
So maybe that's the answer. I'm not sure, Grady, but okay. Those are the type of things we will get into because, again, I'm sure this particular case has happened, I bet, 100 times before, okay. And it's just finding out how other people have dealt with it.
Okay. I do have one more question, but I'll let somebody else.
Go ahead.
Okay, just be a minute. The cellular system up on that smokestack, I think something you should be aware of is that you just can't take those systems off the smokestack, build a tower someplace else, and put the system back up. Each one of those cells, if you draw a circle, the one cell cannot interfere with the next cell. And that's why they end up engineering these things to where it's very critical where that cell tower goes. What I would suggest, I'm not against taking, not taking MERC out of the picture. I think it'd be better if we didn't have them. But I think before we start saying, well, we're going to have this much money, maybe you might want to consider doing it now rather than later, of putting up a tower alongside of that MERC tower. Because you have to remember that cell phone companies up there rely on that for communication. That means it's not just taking the stuff down and moving it over. They have to have a system in place so they can flip a switch, I'm assuming, so that it automatically switches to the new tower. And then at that point, you could have MERC take the tower down. Our hands, everything would be done. There'd be nothing else left to do. I'm just suggesting it. It's going to be a cost to the cellular companies. The cabling up on that tower is in the tens of thousands. So when the councilors make up their mind, I mean, these are things they should consider. And I'd rather see MERC pay for all of the cleanup rather than us not knowing down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Coop.
Hi, I'm Brad Coop from Ward 1. I have a question just about the mechanics of the recyclables. I see we're going to buy 9,000 municipal solid waste containers, and at least it's been my impression for the years I've been living here, I have to buy my own container for the trash that's picked up every day. Why won't that container continue to be good, and why should the city or someone have to buy new ones?
Guy?
A part of the answer, Mr. Coop, is the institution of this program, as it was referenced before, will come with some ordinances that will require the use of a certain size can. In other words, limiting a household's quote-unquote free trash per week to a 35-gallon container.
Right.
And anything above that would be dealt with, as was referenced, potentially through paper bag. Any overflow would be something that an individual household would have to pay for. So you may have a 45-gallon container, somebody else may have a 40, somebody else may have 20s, somebody may have 30s. So the aim is to have a consistent container, first of all, so we could implement what's called a limited waste system, controlling how much trash you can put out from one household, thereby, by default, forcing you to recycle, use the bigger bin. So that's a piece of it. The second piece of it is, ultimately, the city would like to transition to automated collection for the trash. Now, the proposal that's before us, Pine Tree Waste, the subsidiary or LLC of Casella, will be collecting the recyclable containers by automated collection. We will not be doing that initially. We have our trucks that are already manual type trucks and all that, so we hope to transition to automated as we have to replace trucks. And your particular can would not be accommodating to an automated collection system, but the cans that will be supplied to the city by Pine Tree Casella and thereby given to you will be a can that will be able to be accommodated by an automated collection system ultimately.
Okay. I have a couple of follow-ups.
Sure.
I had the pleasure of receiving a little note on my can about 3 years ago, saying it was too large, that I had to go buy a smaller can. A similar note would seem to me to be suitable to get the people to change. I did it, and it's not that expensive. Maybe it's not good for an automated system down the road, but if there is such a associated cost with these containers, I'm intrigued to see why it isn't the same solution that was applied to me 2 years ago. That's a comment. My larger question has to do with this notion that the difference between, say, the SACO recycle program and the proposed dollar amount is related to, or if it's not related to, it doesn't include the purchase of these containers. Is that not a one-time purchase, and so that delta is only made up 1 year? Or did I hear somebody tonight say that's a 10-year financing arrangement for those containers?
When you buy containers, certainly the purchaser has the option of paying it all up front or financing. The upfront cost, round numbers, a 65-gallon container is in the order of $40 to $50 each. So 9,000 of those at $50 each would be $450,000. The 35 is in the range of $30 to $40 each. So 9,000 at $40 would be $360. So 450 and 360 is like 820,000.
Okay.
So if somebody has 820,000 available, they can buy them all year one and not have to factor that cost in going out. Most places don't do that. They finance them over the period of like 10 years. Those carts have an estimated a lifespan of 12 to 15 years. So they're financed typically over 10 years, and that's the number Brian was referencing when we take the total cost to buy the 18,000 carts and you figure out a 10-year amortization rate, that came to about $119,000 a year.
Gotcha.
If I remember
I thought I heard that tonight, and it was the first time I had it. I was thinking it was a one-time cost, and I couldn't understand.
It could be a one-time cost.
Yeah, no, but it'd be huge then.
But most people don't do it that way. Most cities, I guess, or companies don't do it that way.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Mr. Frechette?
Tim Frechette, Ward 3. A couple of quick points I'd like you to just reiterate again is, if we do nothing, what is the cost? Absolute cost to us. And if Casella decides to just sell it to somebody else, what is it going to cost us? And the second piece is, if Casella is responsible for taking that trash and sending it somewhere, at what point are we not responsible for where they take it? Is it They could put it in a truck, and then the contract say it goes to Westbrook, or it goes someplace else. At what point are we not responsible for that trash once it's in the truck? So we don't have to worry about where it goes. Thanks.
Our responsibility is to deliver it to the Westbrook Transfers Facility. Beyond that, it becomes the responsibility of Casella or the entity in Westbrook to transport it beyond that facility.
Thank you. Mrs. Toomey.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I would just really like to thank the city employees, the department heads. Brian, I love you. The work, and Mr. Cassavant, I adore you. You work so hard. And Mr. Stevenson, you did a great job. But I have to tell you that through this whole presentation, I still have to question why you don't factor in the health of the community. There are studies out there about dioxin and heavy metals and furans in Britain. I've got it all over the place. I'll save it for the 17th. But when you're doing this cost factoring, you don't do the deterioration of the roads that those trucks, the 200 trucks are coming in. There's so much more that you could add to this presentation. And it's not to take away from what you've done. I think you should have presented this before the public hearing, so to appease people who are asking all these concerns and questions. I have a lot more to say, but I want to thank Mr. Cassavant, Brian, Mr. Stevenson, Kurt, Keith, and John. I think you've done an outstanding job in presenting what you see can happen. But again, I hear about this, the downtown and the developers. I don't care about that. I care about the health of our community, and that really should be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jakes.
Mr. Fischette, I want to apologize. I answered one of your two questions. By the time I answered the second one, I forgot the first one. But you asked, what was the impact about just doing nothing and Casella continuing to operate? There's so many different scenarios that we can envision going forward. One of them showed here, which is the concept of we know that Maine Energy is not. We're very confident that Maine Energy is not going to be operating the facility in the relatively near future. They've expressed an intent to get out of the business, and so then the question becomes: are we talking about scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3 as to what happens to that facility? One is that another company comes in and operates the facility exactly the way it is. Under that scenario, is that scenario likely? We don't think so, in part because the Tri-County waste handling agreements that Casella currently has and our potential waste handling agreement is valuable to them. And the concept of them just selling that off when they're still in the business, just disposing of trash in a different manner, is unlikely. So we look at the different types of entities that could go into that facility, and it really is all over the place as far as the impacts. One thing's for certain is that it's unlikely that we would sustain a tax assessment at the number that we're currently sustaining it. I mean, part of that was by way of a settlement at the time we entered into the waste handling agreement. The property currently is assessed at over $50 million. It's currently being offered to the city of Biddeford at 6.65 payable over 20 years without interest, and so present value that to get a better idea. Presumably, someone who acquires that facility is going to, right out of the blocks, approach the city about having the taxes reduced to what it feels is the proper assessed value, which would have a direct impact on the tax income that we're bringing in. What that number is going to be, we don't know. I think it's probably pretty safe to assume the number would be significantly less than $54 to $55 million, which is what we're currently paying, which is what they're currently paying taxes on.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Mr. Tarian.
Two more quick questions. Is this deal null and void if Casella does not get the landfill expansion that they want at Juniper Ridge? I know they've applied for it. I don't think it's been approved, and I think it fits into what leads Westbrook to Juniper Ridge. My second question is, these 35-gallon trash containers, will they be ours after 10 years? for us to use with the possibility of an automated waste pickup program down the road? Thanks.
You're challenging me now with a two-part question again. I didn't do so well in the last one. Answering the second one, that's a question that we should explore with them. But the carts are being purchased for the purposes of the city of Biddeford picking up trash. So I think the assumption is that after 10 years, that would become the city's property. But we'll clarify that with them. I think that's a very good question, and thank you for raising it. And the first question again? Oh, okay. Yeah. Two-part answer to that question. First off is the contingency is that they attain the right to accept municipal solid waste at that facility. Currently, they do not have the ability to collect, to basically collect Biddeford's waste at Juniper Ridge or the Tri-County communities. I don't think we're not talking about, or they're not seeking an expansion of the landfill. What they're seeking is permission on the part of the state to be able to accept municipal solid waste at the Juniper Ridge landfill, municipal solid waste from outside that region.
Is that, you look puzzled, or do you have a follow-up to that, or?
I am, because I've read the commissioner's report where...
Go, if you want to go up to the podium, please. John?
Well, I think the important thing to remember about Juniper Ridge in particular is that it's a state of Maine landfill, paid for by state of Maine taxpayers. And all of the communities that are involved with Maine Energy currently are state of Maine generators of trash. And we have, along with everybody else in the state of Maine, been paying for that facility since it was built, since it's designed and the inception of that facility. There is absolutely no reason why any Maine community developing and generating Maine waste that is consistent with the materials that are allowed to go into it would be prevented from depositing waste in a Maine landfill. I think that's the simplest way to deal with it. We have, on the other hand, the older arguments about ownership and out-of-state waste are all off the table at this stage of the game. It's simply, can we take Maine waste to a Maine-owned facility, which Biddeford residents and the other 13 communities have been paying for the last 15 or 20 years. And we paid for incineration at the same time. So we've been running a parallel track.
Council Bedorowski, then Council Raines.
I think the answer to your question is, you can't hear me? Oh, the answer to your question is yes, they can pull out of the deal if they don't have access to Juniper Ridge.
That's not true.
That was one of the contingencies that was given to us at the beginning by...
Not exactly.
MERC has to construct a transfer station in Westbrook, obtain the right to Juniper Ridge, and the city, excuse me?
Yeah,
that's it was word for word by city solicitor.
That's correct, but you're putting a different spin on it. In other words, we have taken some lanes to at least work or talk to the governor's office, and as Mr. Boobier indicated, there is no reason to believe that will not happen.
But it is a contingency.
I could get hit by a comet tomorrow, too.
There's a lot of ifs and whats and maybes. His question was, can they pull out? And the answer is yes.
Yes, but I just want to have the right...
Black and white, the answer is yes.
No, I want to have the right perspective on it.
Yes, Mr. Therian.
Mr. Raines.
Thank you. Already can take so-called bypass waste from our local incinerator. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, and that's actually kind of the stickling point in terms of how the permit is written. It's allowed to accept the bypass from the facilities, but not actually the total of waste going to the facility. So it's a clarification in that permit to allow them to actually accept the waste as opposed to accept just bypass waste.
Right. But the bypass waste can mount up, and it's basically the same stuff.
It's exactly the same material.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same material. Yeah, it's MSW, it goes there now. It's just a matter of the clarification of the actual language.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there has been a dramatic change. The main sticking point with me in the first iteration, the memorandum of understanding which was circulated, was that Biddeford basically had to be with the corporation in trying to get the corporation ownership of Juniper Ridge. That's no longer on the table, as has been said. And this new target is much lower, that basically the MSW be permitted to be permanently deposited or semi-permanently deposited at Juniper Ridge. So, and since the bypass is already allowed there, it would seem that it's not a tremendous stretch to assume that might happen.
I would agree.
Yeah. If I might, one more thing.
Sure.
We heard earlier tonight that maybe SACO ought to kick in something on this, and I've lamented for a couple of decades that it seemed like when SACO was in the process of being aggressive, and frankly they've been more aggressive for more years than Biddeford ever has. Biddeford's tack has tended to be the one that Dan Stevenson encountered when he was first here. They're just any other business. There aren't any negatives, especially we get $800,000 a year. In the early years, SACO got a piece of that. They haven't gotten it for a long time, though they got the negative impacts. But this EVOD that the city got a reduced tip fee because of, and I believe the last contract, that was largely a result of SACO's lawsuits and SACO's putting resources into enforcing the terms of the initial contract with the facility. And there was a lot of gamesmanship. It would have been easy for SACO to fold its tent and give up on that one, but it didn't. And Biddeford profited, I guess you could say. And Biddeford has gotten the lion's share, basically all of the tax revenue from the place for certainly the recent years. It's gotten most of the tax money for all of its years, whereas SACO went out and hired forensic accountants and has invested tons of money over the years to try to make a case to hold the corporation's feet to the fire, to live up to agreements that had been made. Biddeford has tended to coast. And as Rick Hull said 5 years ago, low tip fees are the crack cocaine of Biddeford politics. And the reason why nothing has been done, why this incinerator in the middle of the downtown has continued for this long, is because until this council and until this collection of staff was on the scene, the attitude has been, they pay almost $1 million a year in taxes, and we get a low tip fee. And these environmental factors, the dioxin is a buzzword stuff, the loading of the local environment, were simply what they call in highfalutin terms externalities. They were not considered. No price tag was ever put on those externalities. And as former Mayor Toomey has pointed out, there hasn't been much concentration on the real world impact of those externalities, even in this process. That's, I think, all I'm going to say about that. As I say, I think it's great that we are finally at a moment when the planets are aligned, and it's been a long time coming.
Other questions from the audience? Mr. Pelletier.
Simple question. Why won't you let the voters of Biddeford decide?
Keith?
From a practical perspective, Mr. Pelletier, it's unlikely that if this matter went to referendum, it's very unlikely that if this matter went to a public referendum, that the opportunities that are reflected in these three agreements would still be around. Casella has not indicated any willingness to wait until the end of the year while it pursues other options.
Why do we have to wait till the end of the year for an election?
Presumably, if you go to public referendum, by the time we go through the process, first off, there's two ways to go to referendum. One would be for the council to order that, and then an election being held, or alternatively through a citizen-initiated referendum, both of which take time to get done. I think you'd want to try to get an election that would make some sense from a timing perspective, and try to do a rushed election in the middle of summer would not reflect really what the citizens, would not get a citizen turnout.
Similar to the school budget?
Other questions from the audience? Mr. Perano.
Dr. Daniel Parento, I reside in Ward 5. My question is really related to demolition. As I play out the scenario of, I understand it, if I do understand it correctly, that is the demolition of the building minus the stack. So that debris has to go somewhere. Where does it go? Is it recyclable? And I guess I'll be the first one to do a three-part question. And who recoups the monies that would come from recycling? There's an awful lot of scrap metal to that building and a lot of other materials. Thank you.
Thank you.
Under the contract, Casella is responsible for demolishing the facility. To the extent there's any recycling revenue, they're entitled to retain that revenue, but they are responsible for all costs associated with the demolition.
What's for a second part?
Did I miss part of your question? Oh, where it goes?
Partially where it goes, but so we're the agreement on the table is to spend $6.65 million for property and building, but we're going to give the debris away to someone who's going to demolish it for us. It doesn't seem the right thing to do. That's why I'm asking the question. So, yes, and if you would answer, where does it go? Who is recycling it?
That would be at the purview of Maine Energy as part of its processes as to what it does with the materials and where it recycles it. But yeah, I mean, the purchase price and the negotiations contemplate that Maine Energy is responsible for demolishing it down to grade level and removing all of the debris off-site, and then also the underground storage tanks.
Other questions from the audience? Council Rames.
Thanks. You know, to your question, an earlier iteration of this deal actually, you know, envisioned a bigger role for the city, and you know, the city was going to get the value of the scrap, but it just seemed cleaner in more ways than one to simply delegate that task to Casella, let them hire the people and bear the responsibility for basically leaving a clean site, and with the other levels of environmental investigation, the brownfield stuff and all of that. So the city is, every effort has been made to make sure that the city is not buying a pig in a poke and minimizes the downsides to this deal for the public.
Council Cody.
One question I have is regarding the tear down of the stack, and this just kind of popped in my head. Does the cost of the demolition of the stack also include any costs for removing the debris and taking care of it? I'm not 100%, I don't know if the parts of that stack would be recyclable, we could get money off of it. I'm assuming because some of it, or most of it's been subject to chemical activity and may have some chemicals in it that may, I don't know if that's even recyclable or not. Is the cost of the tear down of the stack also take care of us getting rid of the debris? Thank you.
Brian?
Yes, in terms of the discussion with the removal, that was an all-inclusive price, basically dismantling the stack and disposing of the materials themselves. Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions from the audience? Council? Council Rames?
Thanks. We got a memo today, and there's a letter to the editor in the Courier tonight. Now, they say a good lawyer never asks a question he doesn't already know the answer to, but I'm not a good lawyer. It says here, the city manager estimates that this purchase will have a tax-based budget impact ranging from $782,000 the first budget year to well over $1 million by 2017. And goes on, tax-related costs will continue to rise through the length of this creative financing project. John, could you speak to that? Is your imprimatur on those numbers?
I'm not sure what you're reading from, but if you look at the documents that we've had for the last 2 or 3 weeks, the numbers that we have, essentially the most recent ones, that story was probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
No, it's today.
The information was probably passed on when?
Don't know.
If you look at this sheet, the most recent data shows that the costs are going to range from $540,000 to about $854 in the 30th or in the 20th year.
Mm-hmm.
All here.
You see, I think there was an earlier discussion here tonight.
Let me follow it so that we don't get too far out of sorts.
Well,
here.
the bottom line is about the tax impact.
The original
and,
data.
Yeah.
The original data was close to what those numbers are.
Yes.
The most recent data, which is here, that came in today in the last couple of days,
yeah,
is less than that, and it's been refined.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the most recent data.
I guess the issue that I have is that sounds like more than 35 cents impact on the mill rate. Okay.
Actually, I think it was 0.43. Brian, was that something? Was it when it was $1 million? 0.413 or 0.43.
Yeah, 0.415 is 1,018,885. So just over $1 million.
And the last number here tonight is 0.348 on this most recent document.
Okay, well, you know, the question about referendum has been raised here tonight. It was raised several times. The press jumped on it. The headlines tended to focus on this matter, that this is a cloistered process and the council is not in a position to make these decisions because the public would have a better understanding of this. And yet, when you look at these numbers here, we heard earlier about this sheet here, and you have this apparent controversy, this I don't know if it's confusion, but having this. It says on the last column here, it says cumulative, the total, additive, out over the whole period. And you have this seeming inability to unpack these numbers, to have them make sense. $700,000 sounds like more than 35 cents. I mean, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Well, depending on which numbers you want to put out there, John, is my point.
First of all, I have no idea what you're reading from.
Well, it's in actually, Mike is showing me, it's in this spreadsheet.
No, it's a newspaper.
Yeah, but you said something about a newspaper article.
That's right.
I have no idea what you're talking about. What are you referring to?
What newspaper?
The Courier.
Letter to the editor of the Courier.
But we also, I said that up front, but we also got an email to all counselors today that essentially was that
If
letter.
you look at those numbers, you will find them on the spreadsheet that was released to the public some time ago.
Yeah.
The most recent numbers are these on this spreadsheet that came in this evening as part of this presentation.
Mm-hmm.
This is a refined document, those were gross documents.
Yep. Okay.
So I don't know that there's any difference of opinion. I think there's just a refinement in the data that's available.
Well,
and I don't know that since I don't know who wrote the letter, I can't tell you whether I spoke to that person or not, or whether, there were a number of issues here in terms of costs of the costs for $200,000 home that were in significant disagreement.
Mm-hmm.
$16,000 versus $1,600.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think there are a number of pieces of data that have been interpreted incorrectly. The issue is the numbers that you referred to are numbers that were on a document that's an earlier version of this. But this document is more refined, is more accurate, and is available this evening, which is why we're having a workshop.
Can we get a copy of that?
You have it, I think.
Where?
I think you have it. This is on the website, is it not?
Yeah, it's on the.
This has been on the website. This is on the website.
This is the refined one?
Yeah.
It's on the website? Thank you. Maybe it could be emailed to the
And
counselors?
actually, the one that Richard's referring to, or the numbers that you're referring to from the story, were on a version of this that was on the website.
Could it be
So-
emailed to us, please?
Sure.
Council Mills?
Yes, thank you. The unfortunate problem with letters to the editor is they're usually a week behind in their publication. With the Courier's stance, they have to have a letter to the editor in by Monday, and if this worksheet came out on Wednesday, then they obviously didn't have the right numbers. And as we went through the budget process, we saw a countless number of people come up here and speak about varying amounts that the budget increase was going to be, and every number that was incorrect. And that's just the nature of the beast. We try to keep up with social networking and all that other stuff with getting the updated numbers. But if you're relying on a letter to the editor as a basis on why this should go out to referendum, I don't agree with it. I mean, I want to go on the record that also that I really appreciate the countless number of hours that the negotiating team went forward on this, and I definitely want to see this go forward, and we'll see what happens Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, Mr. Pelletier.
This is a request. Can we get fiscal year 13 increase 0.06 with nothing else, 14.35 with nothing else, so we can figure out what the less confusing numbers without adding all the other numbers, so we can figure out ourselves what the mill rate will be for all these different years with nothing else added to it, so we can see what the real bottom dollar will be. That's not so complicated as this.
Certainly.
Thank you. For the next meeting. It'd be fine.
Councilor Reddy?
Yeah, if I could, the one thing when we reviewed some of these documents that I was able to understand is that 2013, without the Casella deal, the estimated tax bill for a $200,000 home is $3,336. It goes down to 2033, and again, Kirk talked about it with just Casella impact, because that's the only thing we can clearly state. That same $200,000 home, the tax bill would be $3,425.20, $89.20 more 20 years later. So without all the cumulative stuff, trying to figure out how much the total cost is in 20 years and dividing it by the 20 years, and getting the 7928. From year 1 to year 20, a tax bill, the estimated tax bill, again, with just the impact from the Casella deal that we're talking about here, is $89.20. 2033, it's $3,425.20. Today, it's $3,336 for a $200,000 home.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you all for coming. The first reading will be July 17th, and I welcome you there with your questions and opinions. Thank you very much. I'll close this public hearing.
Did you have any further questions?